If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back. We have General McGill Alexander with us again. I'll tell you a bit of frustration. We were struggling a bit with the sound, things like that. You know, it happens, not the end of the world. And I believe today the General is going to tell us about the staff course in Spain. Now let me say to you, let me be honest to you, that anybody who passed the staff course in my eyes is top class. Top class for the simple reason that it's only the brightest, the most intellectual of officers go to the staff course, and those who do very well there, I actually the ones who go to high command. Now I see the General is laughing there at the background. But I myself have a great respect for people who pass the staff course. That's where you plan operations, that's where you look at logistics. You cannot actually fight the war without the staff at the end of the day. It's just not possible. A simple example, where does the diesel come from for your Caspers or for your vehicles? Where does the food come from? Where does the ammunition come from? How do you know to drive in that direction to find the enemy? You know, everything is behind that. There must be some kind of a planning. So, sir, it's over to you. Thank you once again for your time. We're looking forward to this one as well.
Thank you, Chris. I do want to just discuss a few things in the run-up to the going on the staff course, and I hope that I don't get too involved in those things and I don't get around to the staff course, but that's my intention. So, you know, as one talks about these things, memories tend to come back, and then you remember things that you had probably forgotten, and you think maybe I should just include that as well. So we'll see how it goes. When I finished the previous conversation, I'd returned from Chile, and to the happy news that I was being promoted to a major, and that I was also being awarded a medal for something that had happened 2 years before that, almost. Anyway, as the new year started, with my new promotion, I was now appointed to the post of SO2 training. Now, because the battalion had grown so, and was actually consisted of 2 battalions, plus the parachute training center, the parachute packing section, and a few other things as well. It was now a massive unit. It was a regiment, not just a battalion, but it retained the name of one parachute battalion. And because of the size and because of the scope of activities that it was involved in, it was felt that the post of SO2 training should be established, and that a major should be there to coordinate all training aspects and to plan those training aspects and to make sure that they went in the right direction. So this is the job that I found myself doing. It was a challenge because it was something new. There was no predecessor, and I had to pick up all the pieces and put it together. I was given a nice big office with lots of space to put up charts and diagrams and various other things. But then something came in that took up my attention, took a lot of my attention. And as the SO2 training, I was sort of landed with much of the arrangements that had to be done, and that is that one parachute battalion. This was in the year 1982, and in 1982, one parachute battalion reached 21 years of its existence. Now, it was sort of deemed a good occasion to make something big of it, because in those days, 21 was when you came of age, and you were now an adult. So we were, you know, working on the sort of parallel that one parachute battalion had now finally come of age. 21 years old, been involved in a lot of operations. It had trained many thousands of paratroopers. and it had established a very good reputation for itself. So there were big plans afoot for this to take place. We had a new commander. The battalion commander was Colonel Anton van Graan, who had previously been the 2IC of 1 Parachute Battalion and had also for a while commanded a company before that. So he was an experienced paratrooper. He'd also served as the SO1 operations at 44 Parachute Brigade when it was established. So he was now facing this big series of events to celebrate the 21st. And that was on the 1st of April was when the battalion was established. So it wasn't too far into the year, and there wasn't a lot of time to sort out all the arrangements. And we had to get going with that. So I was very involved in that. A lot of printing had to be done, brochures had to be drawn up, people had to be invited, and various other things. And there were 5 things that we did to celebrate the coming of age of 1 Parachute Battalion. The first was we exercised our freedom as a unit, as a battalion, to show that we'd been awarded the freedom of the city of Bloemfontein, which gives you the right as a unit to march through the streets of the city with your colors flying and with your bayonets fitted. Of course, by then we had stopped using bayonets in the SADF, so there were no bayonets involved. But it was an opportunity for a big parade in the city centre, and we did that. And the whole battalion, everybody we could muster that wasn't actually operationally deployed at that stage, that we got together. So I'm not sure just how many people we had on parade there, but it was well over 1,000 that was marching through the streets of Bloemfontein. It was a wonderful parade. Went very well. The guys were very pleased with themselves, and we got a band down. If I remember correctly, it was the only band in the Free State. Military band was in Kroonstad at the School of Engineers, and if I remember correctly, they came down and provided us with the band. Then the next day we had a champagne breakfast for the battalion senior officers and warrant officers just before the weekly coordinating conference that was always held, chaired by the battalion commander. And we had this champagne breakfast. There were lots of things that were going to take place straight after that. So everybody was dressed very smartly for that breakfast. And that led us to the next thing, which was the unveiling of a memorial that had been designed and built to those who were killed in action. And the memorial was an interesting concept that had been developed largely by the previous commander, Colonel Archie Moore. It was a wall, but a wall that was shaped like a parachute canopy that was in the process of deploying, with a pillar representing a person at the end of the so-called rigging lines. But it didn't look like a parachute at first glance. It was only when you were told this that you realized that it was symbolizing a parachute on this wall. And the names of all those who had been killed up till then were placed and were written on plaques, on copper plaques, which were fixed to the wall. And this wall was now going to be unveiled, which took place that next day. The Minister of Defence came down and unveiled the wall, the memorial. The whole battalion was on parade because the wall is actually built right on the edge of the parade ground, so it's there for everyone to see every time there's a parade. And then after that, one of the very big things of the whole celebration was the trooping of the colour. And we'd been practicing for the trooping of the colour in the Tempe Stadium for several months. And that was especially significant to me because I was appointed as the commander of the number 1 guard. There are 4 guards in on parade. and each one commanded by a major. And then the color was trooped in front of all the guards, and then the parade marched past, and the battalion commander took the salute. And the number 1 guard was also the escort to the color. So it played quite a crucial role in this whole parade. And it was my privilege and my honor to be appointed as the commander of the number 1 guard, which I really, it was very meaningful to me. I was very proud of the fact that I had this key role on the parade of this significance and this importance. And it was the first time the color had been trooped since it had been presented. It was presented back in 1969 at a parade which I attended at the time, and it was presented by Lieutenant General Lowe, who was then Chief of the Army, but who had been the founder of 1 Parachute Battalion and the first commander. So since then, the color had been encased and had never been on parade again. And now this was the first time that it was trooped formally in this fashion. So it was a very significant parade and very important to me. I felt really very privileged to have had that opportunity. And then the next day, the last day of the celebrations, which took place over a weekend, was a mass jump where a total of in the region of 450 paratroopers jumped. It was the largest single jump by paratroopers that had taken place in South Africa at that stage. Later at 44 Parachute Brigade, we jumped with more. But and on one particular drop like this, up till that stage, this was the largest number. There were 4 Dakotas, 3 C-130s, and 3 C-160s that dropped the paratroopers. To my great regret, I wasn't able to participate in that jump. And the reason was, again, this was a blatant show of discrimination against me because I was English speaking. The battalion commander said to me, "Jy's die enigste man in die eenheid wat al 2 tale oordentlik kan praat. So you're going to make all the announcements to all the spectators and everybody on the DZ and explain to them what is going on." I'm not so sure whether I was the only one who could speak both languages properly, but I could speak both English and Afrikaans. So that was my punishment for that capability, and I had to stand there in front of all the people when the jump took place. But it was actually quite nice to be able to watch it because it was a magnificent sight. I'd never seen so many parachutes in the air at the same time, or so many aircraft close behind one another, dropping everybody for this occasion. What made it interesting was that the aircraft flew in the following formation. First, there was a single Dakota, which was the oldest aircraft and the aircraft that the first parachute jumps in South Africa had been made from by 1 Parabon. And in that aircraft, as it came over, the people who jumped there were the commander of the battalion, the RSM of the battalion, several previous OCs and RSMs who had joined us for the day, and some of them hadn't jumped for a long time, and they were given refresher training and they jumped. The DZ was a nice open plowed field where there was little chance of anybody getting really badly injured on landing and so on. I think that was all done because of these older guys who were jumping. And then what is interesting is that in that aircraft as well, and he jumped number 1, was the Chief of the Defense Force. At that stage, it was General Constant Viljoen, who was a gunner, but he was also a paratrooper. And he actually did his parachute course when he was a full colonel. So he was quite senior by the time he went through, and he did the whole course. He did the PT and everything else that took place. And when he jumped, he landed and he ran off of the DZ. So, you know, I wonder how many chiefs of any defense force would have done something like that. It was impressive. It was impressive to see. Because, of course, at one Parabon, we always run off of the DZ. It's always been a custom that where after you've jumped, you roll up your parachute and put it over your back, and then you run off the DZ. You don't walk off the DZ. And General Viljoen did exactly that, which was very impressive. Of course, there were a lot of press there and photographers and so on, so they had good photos of him running off of the DZ and so on. And then when this was all finished, then another Dakota came. Oh, well, that was the first one that went, and then after that came the 3 C-130s in formation, and behind them the 3 C-160s in formation, and then behind them the 3 remaining Dakotas in formation. And then after these had all dropped their static line jumpers, another Dakota came, and it went up to, I don't know, it's probably about 10 or 12,000 feet, and it dropped a group of free fallers who had colored smoke attached to their ankles, and they jumped with a battalion flag and the South African flag and landed with that. So it was a nice way to round off the celebrations of the 21st birthday of 1 Parachute Battalion. And I'm really pleased that I had the privilege of being there and of playing a role in all of that. And then all the guests left and everybody went away, and we went back to our jobs, and I went to my new office, and I thought, now I can get down to doing the work of the SO2 training and really get this post working. And I got a call from the battalion commander. I must come and see him. So I went through to his office, and he said, look, one of the company commanders, the commander of E Company, the company has got to leave tomorrow to go up to the operational area to deploy. But the company commander's wife is on the last few weeks of her confinement. There are problems with the pregnancy, and I don't want to send her husband away at this stage. So I want you to take the company up to the operational area. So much for what I was going to do in my new office in the as the SO2 training. So I went up, and we participated in Operation Yahoo, which was in the area around Tsumeb, Otavi, Grootfontein, Combat, that sort of part of Southwest Africa as it was then. And there had been quite a large group of insurgents that had come through into that area. And this is where they wanted us to go and assist. And in charge of that operation at that stage, because it was an operation that extended over quite a long period, but at that stage, in charge of the operation was Commandant Roland de Vries, who was commanding 6-1 Mechanized Battalion Group. So he had 6-1 deployed, but he also had commandos under his command, and the local commandos in the area and other forces that he had available. And that's and now my company of paratroopers that came up there, E Company. It was a particularly interesting operation, and I can remember on one occasion the being in a helicopter when one of the follow-ups had virtually reached, and the follow-up was being done by Kufut, and they had almost reached the insurgents, and as we were circling above them, and they were running down on the insurgents, I was looking down from the helicopter, and I saw this Casper armored mine-protected vehicle that was careering through the bush, and there were a couple of trackers and so on the ground around it, and a few more Caspers coming behind it. And suddenly this Casper, it basically just came to a stop, and sort of the back lifted up and it crashed down again. And it had been hit right in the front by a rifle grenade. And there were some casualties, and the guys peeled out of the back, and we got helicopter gunships in. But it was quite a sight to see this vehicle going through the bush down below us. And all of a sudden, and I just happened to be looking at it when this happened, the vehicle sort of bucked up like this, rocked back, and you sort of saw smoke and flames coming up. So that's just a little memory that I have of that, one aspect of that operation. And then the insurgents that had been deployed, that we were hunting in that area, went into some mountains on the far side of Utavi, on the west of Utavi, and I was given the task of trying to find them. But Roland put together a sort of I won't really call it a battle group, more of a combat team. But it was quite a big combat team, because he gave me, besides my company, E-Company, he gave me a squadron of armored cars and a battery of artillery. So I had quite a large force at my disposal, and we used the artillery to do some selective bombardments in the mountains to try and chase the guys out. We used the armored cars mainly just to increase our mobility and move around and have some fire support where it was needed. And there was another parachute company that was also involved. They weren't with me. It was G Company. They were deployed further north. And their commander, a good friend of mine, Kobus Himon, he managed to pull off a very successful little operation when they got intelligence that there were some insurgents inside a hut or a building, an outbuilding on one of the farms, and they managed to surround this, and they took these insurgents. And lo and behold, it wasn't long afterwards when we got intelligence of exactly the same thing. An insurgent had been identified inside a dwelling that belonged to one of the farm workers, and the farm workers had actually informed that there's an insurgent inside this building, and he was sleeping there, and it was nighttime. And so we knew where the place was. The guy who had informed us said he would take us, show us exactly where the building was. And it wasn't a big deal. I mean, there was only one of them, and all we really needed to do was to surround the place and tell him to come out. And if he didn't, then the guys would start shooting. But he, so I sent I think it was a section that I sent out. And my second in command had never been in action before, a young captain. And he came to me and he pleaded with me. He said, "Please, can I go with them? I really want to go with them." And I was a bit dubious. I said, it's not something where you need to be there. And he says, "No, I know I don't need to be there, but I would like to be there. I would just like to have a chance to be where there is some action." And the armored car commander came along and said to me, "Well, if he's going, I'd like to go as well." So I said, "Okay." I shouldn't have, but I said, "Okay, you guys can go, but just be careful." And they went through with a section, the guys surrounded the place, and they called on the guy to come out, and there was no response. So they opened fire, and they riddled that place with bullets. But this guy, all he'd done is he was lying on a bed, and he rolled off of the bed, and he was lying on the floor. And when they opened fire on the building, they didn't fire low. They fired sort of waist height. So all the bullets went right over this guy. And he was lying on the ground there with his rifle, an AK-47. And then the guys moved forward to go and search the place. And my 2IC was determined to get some action. So he went forward and he kicked open the door. And when he kicked open the door, this guy opened fire. And he caught him with a burst across his chest. And he went down, and the other guys moved forward to get hold of my 2IC. And this guy used the opportunity to jump up and out the door, and he was gone. And he disappeared into the bush and up into the mountains. And we never did catch him again. We tried to follow the tracks the next morning and get as far as we could, but we never did. And my 2IC was very badly hurt, and the guys rushed to get him back to Otavi, but before they got him there, he was dead. So that was a big shock to me. It was a terrible thing. What happened, it shouldn't have happened. Really, if you're an observer, then that's what you need to be, as an observer. You don't start participating in the action. But whatever the case, it was a great loss. He was a fine man. He had a young wife and a baby boy, only I think about a year old or something. So it was a terrible tragedy, and I couldn't go back for the funeral and so on because we were busy with the operation. But my wife Anne attended the funeral, and it was not a happy thing at all. Anyway, that was a sad aspect around what happened, and it was most unfortunate. But I stayed up there with that operation until the company commander was able to come back. I can't remember it. I was there for maybe about 4 weeks with that company, and then the company commander came over. But before I left, we had one other very good success, and in fact, Roland describes it in his book. He got one or two of the details a bit wrong, but overall the operation went as follows. There was information that I think there were 3 of these insurgents they'd made contact with people inside Grootfontein, and they wanted to get to Windhoek. And this guy said that he would take them through to Windhoek by car at night. And the security police got all the information about this, and they heard that this was now going to happen. And the guy that was going to take them through was a guy who was one of their informers. So they arranged with him that they would go through to leave Grootfontein and head for Windhoek. But before they get to Windhoek, when they get to near combat between Grootfontein and Otavi, there was a roadside a little lay-by, a picnic spot underneath this big marula tree. And this guy would pull off over there and get out some, I don't know, fried chicken or hamburgers or something that, and they'd have something to eat before they went the rest of the way. And I was tasked to lay an ambush at this particular spot. And Roland came along as well. And we arrived there in the early evening, and the signals officer, Roland's signals officer, set up some lighting in the marula tree, some massive flood lighting. with a hidden cable so that he could ignite it somewhere. And I put the paratroopers around on various positions around this tree. And then we lay and waited. And we waited, and the night went on. It got later and later, and eventually I thought, and it was getting cold, and eventually I thought, this is not going. The guy's not going to come. We're just wasting our time here. We may as well pack up and go. And next thing is, we saw some headlights coming, and the car pulled over, and it stopped under the tree, and the little table and chairs were there, and the guy got out, and the three guys who were with him and talking and chatting and put their snacks on the table and so on. And then the signals officer connected switched on the lights. The guys were standing there, and all of a sudden they were illuminated in these bright floodlights. They were under the tree, and there they were. And the security policeman who was with us, he had a megaphone, and said to the guys, "You're surrounded. Don't move. Put your hands in the air. We're going to come and search you now." And the guys stood there. They were completely taken by surprise. And when their eyes had sort of got accustomed to the glare and so on, they looked up and they saw all these paratroopers had got up from where they'd been lying and moved forward, and they were surrounded by this company of paratroopers. So they were all captured without a shot being fired. It was a very successful little operation. So as I say, Roland does describe it in his book, Eye of the Firestorm. Then I went back, and then I could finally work on my job as the SO2 training. And I got the whole office going, and I had a little clerk there to help me, and we started coordinating things, and it was going very well. But I was due to go on. I'd almost caught up to my peers now in terms of courses, because I was still trying to catch up. I was still behind them. And I went and did the Battlegroup Commanders course, which extends over a period of, I think, about five months, maybe about 5 months. And that Battlegroup course, which I did together with a couple of good friends of mine, Kobus Simon, Les Rudman, Fanie van Skalkwyk, quite a few paratroopers. It was a small course. We were only about, I think, a permanent force, we were about 15 guys on the course. For the battle handling course, which we did at the infantry school, we were joined by citizen force guys. The battle handling course was 4 or 5 weeks, I think. So the citizen force guys didn't do all the other courses we did, but they did that course, and for that period, the group was much bigger. But interestingly, even on the citizen force course, we had several paratroopers who joined us there. Jet van Sale and Willie Ward, both of whom went on to command citizen force parachute battalions. That course that I did, the Battlegroup course, was, I think, one of the most interesting courses that I ever did, and in many ways one of the most valuable. It was very all-encompassing. We started off with the battle handling, which we did at the infantry school, but then we did an intelligence course at the intelligence school. Now this was all at battalion level, because this course was to prepare you to become a battalion commander. So we did an intelligence course at the infantry at the intelligence school. We did a logistics course at the logistics school. We did a personnel course at the personnel school for those who were up in Pretoria. And then we did a practical phase, which was probably about 2 months, maybe a bit more, two and a half months or so, where we were at Luhatla. And then to sort of round it off, we went to the Danitron Combat School, and we did a counterinsurgency course at battalion level. And these courses were all intensely practical, based on first-hand knowledge of the situations that you would be likely to encounter as a battalion commander. The exercises we did were intensely practical. And the highlight of the course was undoubtedly the time we spent at Luatla, because not only did we go through detail of handling a battle group, which meant that you would have an infantry battalion, but you'd also have an armored squadron, an artillery battery, maybe an armored car squadron as well, and then all the logistic backup for these things. You'd have an engineered squadron attached. So it was quite an enormous organization that you were dealing with on the ground. And we went through detail of how to employ this force like this, and how to plan an exercise or an operation with such a force. So we did a number of, we went through the whole appreciations at that level, and we did planning cycles at that level, operational planning cycles. And we had some really, really fine instructors who prepared us for all of this. And including a great artilleryman, Colonel Felix Hertel. And it was all based on a mechanized battle group. So everything was mechanized. You had Ratel infantry combat vehicles that most of the force was utilizing, but you had Eland armored cars, and you had I can't even remember I think we already had Olifant tanks at that stage. So you had the tanks as well. And it was really a magnificent course, a really detailed course that you did, everything that you were supposed. And then it sort of culminated with a week or two long exercise. Might even have been longer, I can't remember. But for the actual exercise, the force was physically there on the ground, and you were appointed in key positions, and you were given a task, and then you'd have to go through a planning cycle. And then you'd have to issue the orders, and then you'd have to move this force, and you'd have to make sure that it was supplied logistically properly. And because of the size of the range at Luatla, which is designed for you to move brigades around, moving a battle group was easy. There was no problem. You could move that anywhere, and you could use all the weaponry that it had and fire the everything in. Live. It was all live firing that took place, and when you had to replenish the ammunition, and you had to keep the troops supplied with rations and so on, and you had to know how to utilize your RSM and the echelon vehicles and everything that went with it. It was a fantastic course. Of course, there wasn't room for everybody to be appointed as the battle group commander, but I was one of the lucky guys. I got that appointment, and I got it right in the beginning of the first. So I had to mobilize this force, carry out an advance, and then do an attack. And then after the attack, we had to go for a defense. But for the defense, I was then replaced by somebody else, and I was relegated to being a company commander after that. So we got turns at doing different positions. But I had the battle group commander's position for what I think was the most important part of the exercise. It was called Exercise Romulus and Remus. And Romulus was the offensive part of the operation, and Remus was the defensive side of the operation. So I had the post as battle group commander for Romulus, for the offensive part, and it was an absolute highlight for me. It was a wonderful opportunity, and it was such good training because it was practical. It was on the ground. It was really learning how to do this in real life. And I can remember at one stage I was busy issuing orders and radio orders from my rattle to the various people, and a rattle comes and pulls up next to me, and it's Felix Herzer, who was I think he was the course commander or the 2IC of the battle school. I can't remember, but anyway, he had a key position there, and his rattle pulls up next to me, and he says something to me, but now I've got my earphones on and my chest box, and I'm trying to monitor several nets at once and so on, and I turn on and I see him, and I see he's talking to me, so I get my helmet off and I pull everything off, and I sort of tell the people to stand by, and I'm quite flustered, you see, and I turn around and I say, yes, sir. And he looks at me and he says, Mac, he says, you're looking confused. A commander must always look as if he's in control. A commander must maintain his pose. You're losing your pose. So I said, sorry, sir. He said, no, carry on with it. So, I put all the stuff back on. And it was a good little lesson, I thought, but that was how Felix Herter worked. He was deliberately making me confused and then pointing out that I shouldn't get confused. So, so it was a wonderful course, and it's one that, in my memory, it remains one of the most valuable courses that I ever did in the military. Was my battle group commander's course, and particularly the practical phase at the Army Battle School. So, I thought I'd just mention that. I went back to 1 Parabon. I had a brief holiday over the end of the year period, and I came back, and the commander had now decided to change things a bit. I was no longer the SO2 training. I was now appointed as the 2IC to James Hills at the training wing, or the training battalion. James had been the operational battalion commander, but the OC had decided that he was sitting up in Angola with I think it was Operation Meerbos at that stage for such a long time that he needed to come back and spend a bit of time at home. So he was put in charge of the training battalion, and Chris LaRue was put in charge of the operational battalion, and he went up there. And very sadly, during the time that we were on the Battlegroup Course, we had that terrible situation when during the operation in Angola, where a Puma helicopter flew over an anti-aircraft site, and it was shot down, and it burnt out. And inside the helicopter were the 3 crew, the SAF crew, and 12 paratroopers who were burnt beyond recognition. And it was a terrible thing. It was a huge loss to 1 Parabon. And in fact, the parents agreed that we should bury the remains of those paratroopers at the Wall of Remembrance on the parade ground, and that is what happened too. So their grave and their remains were all placed in that particular place, and they're still there now. So that was a terrible thing that happened, but we weren't at the battalion at that stage. We were on course. Anyway, now I'm James Hills as 2IC in the training battalion, and James Hills. In fact, when I went on holiday, James had actually said he and I were good friends, and so our families went on holiday together to the Royal Natal National Park, and we went camping there. And knowing that now for this next year we're going to be training, working with the companies that are being trained, and we discussed how we're going to do the training with them. And that's when sitting around the campfire talking, discussing how we're going to handle this when we get back to work. That's when I started telling him about the Chilean Commando course. And that's when he said to me, but we've got to, ons moet daai goed vir die troepe leer. We need to do it. We must teach the troops. We must subject the troops to this. That's beneficial stuff. So when I went back and we got moving with this, we did some wonderful training. It was really, really good stuff. And we were out in the field, out at the Brug most of the time, building ranges, taking them through all sorts of, and doing other training within their unit lines and so on. It was a great period that I did with James Hills. But while I was busy with him, I felt I've now caught up with all my courses. In fact, I'd reached the stage now where I was due to now go on a staff course, and they had already sent me some manuals and things that I could start studying. And provisionally, they said, maybe next year you'll go on staff course, or maybe the year after, but you've got to start preparing now. And so once I had done the staff course, I would have caught up to everybody. Then I would finally have ek sou my agterstand ingehaal het. So you know, it was this was good for me, that I could actually start. I could see the staff course up ahead of me now. But then what happened was, I was concerned that I'd now done the parachute instructors course. Before I went to Chile, Chris LaRue, who was 2IC of the battalion, called me in and he said, I'm not letting you go to Chile wearing ordinary wings. You got to wear instructors wings when you got there. You got to have that extra status. So I'm sending you on the parachute instructors course, which I was thrilled about. And it was an excellent course. It was very good. So I'd now qualified as a parachute instructor as well. But there was one thing that I regretted. I didn't actually. I had never done the tactical military free fall course. It wasn't necessary for me to do it, and there wasn't really much point in it. But I said to James Hills, "There's a free fall course coming up. I want to apply for that." And he wasn't very happy. He said, "We got too much work to do on the training here. That's a foofy. It's not important. You don't need to do free fall." So I said, "Yeah, but I'd like to be able to talk on that level with the guys. I've done civvy free fall, but that's not the same." So eventually he said, "Okay." So I went and saw Chris LaRue, who is the battalion 2IC, and I said to him, "Can I do the course?" So I was put on the free fall course. I did the free fall course, which was great. I really enjoyed it. It was very different from civilian free falling, because you focused on jumping with kit and jumping at night and grouping in the air and grouping on the ground at night and using all sorts of little techniques and so on. And it was a really, really good course. So, I was really enjoying the courses that I was doing at that stage. And then the day after we qualified in our free fall course, there was a demonstration jump that had to be done at the stadium in Bloemfontein. And Johnny Kisser, who had been our instructor, and who I have the greatest respect for, and who was a legend when it came to parachuting. But I have to admit, he made a mistake that day. He decided that, seeing as we've just qualified on this free fall course, we can go and do that. They want to do a demonstration parachute jump into the stadium, and we can go and do that. It's fresh in our minds now. We've been doing a lot. We're doing 5-6 jumps a day, and we've been doing that for 2-3 weeks, and so we got a lot of jumps behind us now. We've been jumping with the square parachutes were just becoming acceptable within the military type of square parachute, the MT1, which was actually an awful parachute. It had an opening shock that could break your nose or your jaw or something the way the harness came up. So you'd have to drop from the normal stable position, you'd have to go into a crouching position and drop your knees a bit and then open in that position. So you're almost in a sitting position when it opens, so that the shock doesn't hit you in the face. But we've done that now, and we've done quite a few jumps with the MT1 parachute, and it's not as maneuverable as a civilian square parachute, but it's certainly a lot better than the old paracommandos and other free-fall parachutes that used to be used. So we go up in the Dakota, and I was with Quibus Himon, this friend of mine. He was on the free-fall course with me, and we were very good friends. And we were overconfident now. We know how to do this. We're big deal now. We got a red wing. And now we're going to show them how to do a jump into a stadium. So we went out. I can't remember what height, probably about 10,000 feet or so. It was a nice clear day, and we're coming down, and we hadn't been given any instructions of what to do while we're free falling. But Quibus and I decided, we're going to jack around a little bit, and so we did some maneuvers there, and we played around and so on, and then we noticed we're coming close to our opening height now. So we tracked away, and I was actually, Quibus had opened, and I was still falling, and I tracked away, and I looked, and I was lower than I should have been. I should have been opening at about 3,000. I was down, and I was getting close to 2,000 feet now, and I opened. And when I opened, I saw the other guys who were right over there above the stadium, but the stadium's far from where I am. And I should have realized immediately, I'm not going to make the stadium. Don't waste your time trying to get to the stadium. Just find a place where you can land safely. And I didn't do that. I was determined to get to that stadium. So I turned around and I rode with that parachute. And I was riding with the wind, and I was getting closer, but then I realized I'm not going to make it. And there were these big blue gum trees around the edge of the golf course near the stadium. And I came, and by the time I'd reached them, I had to actually lift my feet so that I didn't catch the tops of the blue gum trees. And now I'm still going with the wind. So then I made a cardinal error. I decided, there's a green just in front of me. I'm gonna land there, but this is a square, so I've got to land into the wind. But I was too low to turn at that stage. But I pulled down to turn, and it was a classic hook turn. And of course, when you do that, you lose altitude very rapidly. And when I turned to do this hook turn, where I turned and I went into just a slight slope on the edge of the green, wham, and I hit that hard. And when I hit that, I knew I'd hurt myself. And I was still, I don't know, about 150 meters, maybe 200 away from the stadium. So there was no chance that I would have made the stadium. But I was too inexperienced. I thought I knew everything, and I didn't know anything. So when I hit that ground, I knew, I could feel in my foot that I'd hurt myself. And I lay there for a moment, just catching my breath. And I look up, and there's a civvy. And he looks over the fence, and he saw me land, you see. And he says, "Is jy all right? Are you okay?" No, I'm a big deal paratrooper. I can't sit and weep in front of the civvy here. So I said to him, "Yeah, ek's reg, no probleem nie." And I stand up, Yeah, the pain in my foot. I thought I was going to die, but I've got to, what Felix Herter said, the commander's got to maintain his pose. So I maintain my pose, and this guy looks at me disbelievingly, and he walks off, you see. And as soon as he was out of sight, I collapsed onto that thing. That foot of mine was sore. Anyway, they came along, and when they came, they brought an ambulance because they could see that I was in trouble. And took me to the hospital, and with great difficulty, we got the boot off. And I'd broken my foot. So they put me in plaster. Now, James Hills wasn't impressed with me because now I can't do he said, I told you not to go and do that free fall course. I said to him, the course is finished now. He said, well, you shouldn't have been jumping today. But anyway, there I was. So now I can't do certain of the training, and I'm inside the lines of the unit, and I'm a pain in the neck for everybody, because I'm irritated, because I want to get out into the field, and I can't really do anything. And next thing is I get a call that I must go and see the OC, Colonel van Graan. So he says to me, listen, you're becoming a pain in the neck in the battalion, yeah, because of your foot. Next week we're starting the National Rifle Association, the annual Bisley, and when this takes place, we're needing a chief range officer. So I'm appointing you as the chief range officer. You can take one of the Firefly Jeeps. It's a cut down Land Rover, and you can use that as your vehicle on the range. And so I said to him, sir, please, those guys are mostly civvies. He says, no, Anton van Graan was a Bisley shotist. He'd won the chief of the champion shot medal, I don't know how many times, for the best shot in the whole of the Defence Force. And he was very active, and later became captain of the national team that represented South Africa. And he said, well, that's what you're going to do. And I was very unhappy about it. I really didn't want to go. So I went to the Bisley. I had to go. And I went there with an attitude, because, I didn't want to be there. And I didn't want to run a range with all these civvies. And I said to him, but there's no discipline. The civvies, they don't know how to behave on a range. And every excuse I used, he just said to me, you're going. So I went. And the amazing thing is, I really enjoyed it. And those civvies were highly disciplined. And they did exactly what I told them to do. And there was no problem on the range. And, they gave me, Anton van Graan gave me instructions as to what I must do, how the exercises work, and so on. And so I strutted around there with my hobbling on my foot, mostly riding around in this little Firefly vehicle, which is like the sabers that the Special Forces use. And on the range, we had an incident. In those days, when you were participating in national championships like that, you weren't allowed to use self-loaded ammunition. Now, they were all shooting 7.62 millimeter rounds, but with the proper target rifles that they use. Single shot rifles, bolt action rifles. But they weren't allowed to take hand loaded. These days, they only shoot with hand loaded. The guys load their own ammunition and so on, because, it's become a very sophisticated now. But in those days, you had to use issued ammunition, and you weren't allowed to take any other ammunition because that gave you supposedly an advantage over your competitors. And we had a lot of people from the Defence Force, a lot of people from the police, and a lot of people from the Railway Police, which was still a separate organization at that stage. And one of the keen shotists at the Bisley every year was the then Minister of Police, Louis Lagrancy. And he was on the range as well. And anyway, it was going quite well. And then one of my range officers, because I had lieutenants who were at the various ranges that I was controlling, came to me and he said to me, Major, I've picked up a problem. And it was a police brigadier, a railway police brigadier. And this guy, the range officer, had seen that this brigadier had brought self-loaded ammunition onto the range. And he was very surreptitiously replacing the issued ammunition with his own ammunition and using that to fire. So I went along and I checked, and I saw that that was the case. So I said, Brigadier, I'm withdrawing you from the competition, and I'm reporting this to the range committee. They will have to discipline you. Yeah, that brigadier was angry. He was so angry with me. But that's what the range officer does. He checks for things like that, and he has to sort that sort of thing out. So this guy was taken before the range committee, and they banned him from the rest of the competition, and he was sent home. And I don't know what happened to him. I didn't really ever see him again, but unfortunately that is what happened. So, and so, the next day, one of the other shotters comes to me and he says, you know what Minister Louis Lafrance is saying about you? So I said, no, what? He says, Louis Lafrance called us, all the policemen together, and he said to us, Julle moenie met daai majoor sukkel nie. Hy's 'n bedommerde Engelsman. Don't cause trouble with that major. He's a well, I don't know how you translate bedommerde, but he's a very difficult Englishman. Don't cause any trouble with him. So anyway, they never did, but I never had trouble from the police anyway. That guy was from the railway police, which were later incorporated into the police. So anyway, that was my first Bisley. And I was so surprised that I really enjoyed working with the guys on the range. And what surprised me even more, because I came there with an attitude, and I was difficult with most of the people that I dealt with. But what surprised me more than anything else was that the shottists on the range enjoyed having me there. And the council of SANRA, the South African National Rifle Association, they said, listen, won't you come and do this for us again next year? So I said, well, if I'm available, I'd be happy to do that. So I wasn't able to, because I wasn't there. And for I think it was another 10 years before I was available again. But then I started going, and when I was available after that, and I've been the chief range officer for the National Bisley every year for, I think I've had a total of 25 times that I've done it over the past 30 odd years, or 33 years. So, it's become part of my way of life. In fact, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going again to be the range officer. And I've really enjoyed doing it, but I sort of got into it by default. And I'd never been a Bisley shottist myself, so I never sort of graduated to that post. I just found myself in it. But it wasn't very long after that the Colonel van Graan called me into the office again, and he said to me, there's been a need to send somebody to Spain on the Spanish staff course. The army was supposed to nominate someone and send the person, and they decided not to do it. And when the Minister of Defense found out, he was extremely angry, and he told them that they will send somebody. Now they need to send somebody, but they haven't really had time to, because it's the person's got to go in, I think it was in a month's time. And they haven't had time to send anybody on to do the proper language training and so on. So they've checked through people's files and so on, and they see that you can speak Spanish. Well, that's stretching it a bit to say that I can speak Spanish, because I could do a smattering of pidgin Spanish as a result of having attended the commando course, but I wasn't by no means fluent in Spanish. But they phoned me now from Army headquarters, And they asked me whether you would be interested in attending the Spanish Army Staff Course. So I told them, yes, you are interested. So, you know, I wasn't even given a choice about that. The OC had decided I'm going. So, you know, I hope it wasn't because he wanted to get rid of me, but anyway, it was quite a privilege to be selected to go. So I went off to Spain. I had to take my wife up to Pretoria, and they were going to test our Spanish now, or my Spanish. But they wanted to interview my wife as well. Anyway, she didn't know any Spanish. She'd never done any sort of Spanish. Anyway, they weren't too impressed with my Spanish, but they didn't have anyone else that they could send. You know, they got a language practitioner, a Spanish-speaking language practitioner to test me, and she wasn't all that impressed. But anyway, that's the way it was. But they sent me in sometime in May. So the course was only starting in September. So I had the European summer, I had the rest of May, and I had June, July, and August. So I had more than 3 months before the course was actually starting. And what they did was they sent me with my wife and our kids and our total household effects. I said, you know, what do I do? Do I store all my stuff? They said, no. You take everything with you. So everything was loaded into a container and sent to Spain. And we went over there, and for the first few, I think it was a couple of weeks that we were in a hotel until they'd found accommodation for us. The embassy in Madrid had to make sure that we got accommodation. And then the military attaché took me. We got a very nice little house in a suburb. It's actually a little village on the outskirts of Madrid called Aravaca. And we moved into this little house, and it was very comfortable. Really, we were very well set up there. And Anne was very excited about this. She was really looking forward to it, and the kids were excited. They'd just started school. I was excited because now maybe I'm going to be able to spend more time at home, because, you know, the kids had grown up. I hadn't been there when they started talking. I hadn't been there when they started walking. I hadn't been there when they on their first day at school. I'd missed all these sort of things. I'd missed their birthdays. I'd missed everything. And now I could finally spend a bit of time with them. But I knew the staff course is not an easy thing. It's you know, it's where you go to be trained for, as you said earlier on, for higher appointments, colonel and higher. You know, they think you've got the potential to maybe become a general one day. So, you know, you've got to be trained at the necessary level for this. And now you've learned how to work up to battalion level. But now you need to learn how to work when you get to brigades and divisions and that sort of thing. So I was really thrilled to be in Spain. I quickly found out that my Spanish language was severely lacking, but there'd been money made available. The military attaché informed me that there's money available. He's got a language teacher lined up who will come to me 3 days a week and do language training with me. And so she did. Carmen was her name, and there was also money for my wife. So I had 3 days a week. My wife had 1 day a week. This girl taught her as well, so she was able to learn some Spanish too. She didn't need it that desperately, but I mean, she needed to be able to go shopping and you know, and do various other things, because we were not going to be part of the embassy. I was attached to the Spanish Army for this course. And in fact, the military attaché took me to the guys in the army, and they issued me with all my books and things that I'd have to study. So I used a lot of those books during the language training with. And they issued me with a Spanish Army identity card so that I could get access to messes and other places. You know, I was basically attached to the Spanish Army for this course. And I was taken to the college and introduced to the lecturers and so on. But then the European summer arrived and everything sort of shut down and everybody went on holiday and nice weather and so on. And I had to now study my language, which was good. And I had the opportunity to, you know, Anne and I explored Madrid. We went around all over the place. Our kids were enrolled at the American School of Madrid. So they wouldn't be, which was marvelous. And the state gave me, you know, the state paid for my accommodation. It was really a wonderful situation to be in. And I got a bit of an allowance for living in another country and so on. It wasn't a massive allowance, but it was every little bit helped. So, you know, we were saving quite a bit while we were in Spain, and we were grateful for that. You know, Anne had to learn a few things quite early, because a lot of things, I'm talking about, you know, 30 years ago. And it's going on for 40 years ago now. But she had to learn to. We didn't have friends over there. We didn't know people. We had to make friends in the neighborhood, and they were all Spanish speaking and so on. And the way that the Spaniards did things, they tended to not shop monthly. They shopped weekly or sometimes even daily. You know, go out and buy the stuff that they want. And they all lived close to the little shops and so on. And you know, it wasn't there were supermarkets were starting to be known in Spain, but Spain was far behind the rest of Europe, and most of the Spaniards preferred going to the little shops and so on. And there was a butcher down the road and so on. And so now and when she went to go and buy chickens, for instance, the chickens were sold to you with all the insides in. With the feathers on, everything was there. And if you didn't want that, you had to tell them. Otherwise, that's how you got it. And you cleaned the chicken and cut it up and did it the way you wanted. So one of the first things that Anne ever learned to do is when she was to go to the butcher and say, "Quiero un pollo, por favor." I want a chicken, please. And they would get the chicken out, and then she would say, "Sin cabeza, sin patas y limpio," without its head, without its feet, and clean. So and then they do that. They chop it all up and give it, and then she get her chicken. So there were lots of things we had to learn, and you know, it was a whole new culture that we were immersed in, and we had to figure out how we were going to do this. So that was our first summer in Spain. It was very nice. We got to know Madrid very well. We moved around a lot. We learned how to use the underground. We learned how the buses worked, and we worked. We thought we were doing pretty well with our language training. The language teacher had unlearned all my bad Chilean habits that I'd picked up, and taught me the right words to use and the right expressions, and how to speak using the lisp that the Spaniards use, which the South Americans don't use. So there were a lot of little changes that we had to do. And then I reported for duty at the staff college on the first day of the course. And the first 6 weeks of that course were what they called el martillo, the hammer. The hammer. For those first 6 weeks, every day you wrote exams. And one day it would be exams on infantry. Another day it would be exams on logistics. Another day on artillery. Another day on engineers and so on. And I didn't know anything about this. It's all the Spanish stuff, of course. And it used to drive me crazy because I would sit there at night with a book, and it'd be a thick book like this. And it would take me an hour just to read through one page, never mind understand it. But now I've got to write an exam on this whole book tomorrow. So it was totally impossible. I don't know, we never got our marks. It was this was just made to force us to refresh our thinking and so on. You know, I'd sit there in the exam in the room, and I'd see the Spaniards going through pages and pages and pages, and I'm struggling to write 2 pages, you know. So that was really, it was really tough, that martillo. But it was good. It got you into the right frame of mind. Although I felt pretty depressed, you know, I kept going home and saying to Anne, "This is not going to work, you know. I'm never going to be able to do this thing. I can't maintain the space. I can't keep up with them. I don't understand what's going on." But then we started the actual course itself, and then I forgot about all the exams that we're doing, and then it was all instruction that we were getting, and we had to start working. Now the Spanish Army Staff Course extends over 2 years. It's unlike our course is generally it's a year, and in most countries a staff course is a year, but in Spain it's 2 years, and it's 2 years mainly because in the first year you focus on tactics and logistics at brigade and division level, and then in the second year, when you're doing tactics and logistics, you go a little bit higher, and you do at corps level, Army Corps level, and then at Army level, and then at Army Group level. So you're going to a much higher level. But of course, you know, if you've mastered it at brigade and divisional level, it's just a little bit of adjusting at those higher levels. So that's not all you do in the second year. In the second year, you also look at certain what they call special operations, or special types of operation, and those were things like the airborne operations, amphibious operations, the crossing of water obstacles, guerrilla operations, and subversion. So that's those were the sort of things that you did at in the second year. But you didn't just do tactics and logistics. You had various subjects that you did during the day. You'd start off doing tactics and logistics, and then you'd go on to organization and staff duties. And then in the first year, you did military geography. In the second year, you did military history. And then you'd have to do language, and then there'd be a little bit of sport. So you had those 5 different things that you did in each of those years. Now the organization and staff duties that you did was a little bit different from what we did. In the first year, you covered things like public speaking, like presentation techniques, service writing, conferences and meetings, how you conduct them, what they must consist of, and so on. You did documentation, filing systems, work manuals, statistics. You did work study and plant layout, how offices should be arranged, and various things like that. And then in the second year, you did in that same subject, you did things like defense policy and national logistics. You did organization and constitution of the state. you did the organization of the Spanish General Staff, and you did laws in the country relating to defense. So the second year, in a sense, was more like our joint staff course that we used to have, because it was working on a much higher sort of level. Then the important thing about the military geography and the military history was it was a slightly different approach to the way we had done it when I was at the military academy, because I'd done both those subjects at the military academy. With a military geography, they would take different areas in Spain and they would do an analysis, a military analysis of that area in terms of the negotiability of the terrain, the influence of rivers and of weather, the condition of the roads, possible areas that are important for where insurgents could get sustenance from. So that was the approach to the military geography that they did. With the military history, it was again looking at specific battles and campaigns, and then analyzing them as one would do with a military appreciation, to see what had gone wrong and why they went wrong and what they should perhaps have done. So I found that very different and quite a refreshing approach to the way that those subjects were handled by the Spaniards. The language that you did, it was only about 4 hours a week that you did language for, but and it would be sort of 1 day, 1 hour in a day that you go to the language people. Now the Spaniards all had to do either English or French, because those are the languages of NATO. So they had to study either English or French, and that was their language study. For the people from non-Spanish speaking countries, you had to do Spanish. So I was getting Spanish instruction from military instructors during the course, which was, I think, very valuable. It was very useful indeed. And then sport, you did 2 hours once every 2 weeks. You'd go out to one of the sporting facilities, and you'd be able to choose what you want to do. And you know, I'd normally go for a cross-country run. The other guys, the Spaniards were not, the Spanish army is not great on sport, so they didn't really put in a lot of effort into that at all. It was really just a break from the studies that you were getting. Then they had practical exercises. So when we'd been done through a phase of work, then we would go and do a practical exercise at brigade level, and you'd go out into the field. You'd be divided up into little syndicates, say 4 guys, each given a Land Rover. And unlike the situation that we have, where the students would go and draw vehicles, and then that's a vehicle that you take out with you. The Spaniards don't work like that. Well, I'm talking about nearly 40 years ago. They may have changed by now, but in those days, when a troop came in to do his national service, and they had a 2-year national service system at that stage. I know they don't have it anymore, but they did have it at that stage. But when a soldier came in, he was trained as a driver, and then he was issued with a vehicle. And for the rest of his service, he drove that vehicle. No one else drove it. So if you put in a request for a vehicle, a Land Rover, to go somewhere, you'd get your Land Rover with a driver. And that is actually a very good system, because one guy was responsible for that vehicle, and he had to maintain it and make sure it was kept in shape and going well. And when it was inspected, he always inspected, and there was nobody else drove that vehicle except him. So I thought that was a good system. It did mean that you had one less person you could accommodate in the vehicle, because you weren't driving yourself. But, we would go, these little syndicates of about 4 people each, and we'd go off with these Land Rovers. And then you'd do a reconnaissance of the area where they say the exercise is going to take place, and you'd have to do presentations and preparation and orders and so on based on these practical exercises. They were done without troops. It was just going into the area, studying the area and saying where and how you'd position things and how you'd move. Then you go back into the classroom, and in the classroom, you get them put up maps of that area, and you show them how you're going to move the various battalions, or if you're working at divisional level, how the brigades are going to be moved around and where they would go to. And you get judged on whether you've assessed the terrain properly and whether you could actually fit a brigade into that area, and whether they could move at that speed over that period at distance and so on, and whether your logistic cover is good enough. There was a sign up in the front of the classroom. So where we were sitting, when we looked towards the front of the classroom, we always saw the sign. And it was a sign, the story really stuck in my mind and brought something home to me very strongly. And I learned that on this course, and I applied it in all my subsequent dealings and appointments and jobs that I did in the military. And the sign said, sin logística no hay táctica. Sin transporte no hay maniobra. And that is, without logistics, there can be no tactics. Without transport, there can be no maneuver. And that little quote that was up there in the sign throughout the time that I was doing the course, it stuck in my head. And they placed tremendous emphasis on logistic support in everything that they did. You don't do anything unless you can logistically support what you do. I think what we're seeing happening in Ukraine at the moment there might be some people there on the Russian side who could have done well to learn that lesson. But anyway, this was something that was impressed on me during the course that I did there, and I'm grateful that it was. I think it was valuable. Then I'd like to say something about the daily program. The Spaniards had a very different approach to what we had, and they were quite formal in the way they presented the course. So in the mornings, you had to be there at a certain time. Usually I started a lot later than what we did. I normally started at 9 o'clock in the morning. They didn't run through the whole day. It started at 9 o'clock and you'd finish at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Then you'd break for lunch and then you'd carry on in the evening again. So it was a strange way of working, but it was the way that they worked. And I'll get onto that a little more about that in a moment. But every morning when they started, all the students had to be in the class. The class captain, what we used to call an our staff course, we would in South Africa, we used to refer to him as the beagle, the student leader who's appointed. And the student leader would make sure everybody's there. And if there's anybody who's not there, he'd make notes as to why he's not there and what the problem is and any issues and so on. And then he'd go and stand at the door, which is at the back of the classroom. And then the lecturers would arrive. And the lecturers would be, the chief instructor would be in front. And as they'd come down the passage, he'd say, stand by, and everybody stands at their desk, standing up, and he'd say, firmes, and everybody comes to attention. And you stand at attention behind your desk. And we had desks that accommodated 2 students, so you had 2 students at each desk that was in position. And you stand at attention at your desk, and then the lecturers arrive at the door, and he salutes and he greets the chief instructor, and then he reads the report on what the situation is. Everybody present, no problems, or so-and-so is missing, he had to see a doctor because he wasn't well yesterday, or whatever the problem might be, and so on. And the chief instructor would, very serious, frown on his face, he'd nod and he'd say, "Thank you very much." And then the guy would stand aside, and then the chief instructor would march in, and all the other instructors behind him. And they'd go down the aisle with everybody standing at attention, and they'd all come past you, and he'd walk in a very stately, slow march type of way down the aisle to the front. And in the front, on a raised platform like stage in the front, there were desks for all the instructors. So there was a row of instructors' desks and the chief instructor on one side, half facing the other instructors and the class. And they'd all go and get to their positions and stand behind their desks. The chief instructor would stand behind his desks and he would say, "Good morning, you may be seated." And then we'd all sit down. And then the lecturer who's going to give the lecture for that lecture, that particular period, would come forward and he'd give the lecture. And all the lecturers would be there for the whole lecture. And the chief instructor would sit there and listen to everything that goes on. And you're all sitting over there and they're watching you the whole time. And so everybody's there, all the students and all the instructors, all during the lecture. For tactics and logistics, you wouldn't have your guy who's giving the language and the guy who's giving the organization, staff duties and so on. That's a separate, that comes later. But tactics and logistics, the important one, first I think 3 or 4 hours of the day, 3 hours of the day, every day was tactics and logistics, and they would be there. And then you sit down and they give the talk. So that was quite formal, quite a formal start to every day. They had a practice which I could never understand. They allowed you to smoke in the class. And almost all the Spaniards smoked. I think there were 2 in the whole class. And there were about, I think there were about, just under 30. When we started, it was probably just over 30 Spaniards on the course. And in the first year, we had 4 foreigners. But the other 2 foreigners came, one from Venezuela, one from Argentina, and one from Peru. So they all spoke Spanish. So I was the only one in the class who didn't speak Spanish. The foreigners from those countries, 2 of them, I think, also smoked. And except for 2 or 3 of the Spaniards, all the other Spaniards smoked. And most of the instructors smoked as well. And they'd all sit there during the course while the lecture is on, smoking. And the blue haze that gathered up on the roof and below the ceiling would gradually descend. And by the time the lessons were over for the day, you could hardly see across the room. It was such a haze of smoke in there, particularly in the winter time, because they'd keep all the windows shut. So it was terrible. And a few years ago, I was coughing badly, and there was definitely something wrong. And I went to the doctors, and they identified that I had a condition, which I still have, called bronchiactasis. And they said generally about 50% of cases with bronchiectasis, it's a lung condition where the bronchial tubes become enlarged, and the hairs inside your tubes cannot expel the mucus that collects in your lungs. And it can't be cured. There's no way you can cure it. So, you've got to learn to live with that. So that's a condition that I have. When I said, well, now what causes that? They say, well, about 50% of the time it's because the person's been a smoker. So I said, I've never smoked. So, you know, they said, but the other 50, I said, what about the other 50%? Said, well, they're not too sure about that. But, and then the guy said to me, the doctor said to me, were you exposed to a lot of secondary smoke? So I said, well, you know, both my parents smoked. So as a child I was. In the military, I generally had came up against people who smoked a lot, but I avoided them as much as I could. I said, but for 2 years, and I told him what it was like at the Spanish Army Staff Course. He said, well, that's probably why you've got the condition. So, you know, it's just interesting because he said secondary smoke is probably worse than the actual initial smoke that goes in. So anyway, that's probably where I picked up this particular condition. But of course, I didn't know about it at that stage. So we had the situation of the formal aspect. We had the situation of the smoking, which I had constant battles with these guys. In the wintertime, if there was a break, because you normally had about a 10-minute break, you have 50 minutes for each period, and then 10-minute break. So it was an hour per period. That it was, and when you had the break, instructors went out, and you could get up and walk around and so on. I'd go straight to the windows and open the window. Man, and these guys would run back and pull the windows closed again. These old-fashioned sash cord type of windows that you could pull up and down. So I had a constant fight with the guys about the. Then the other thing was the lunch break, la comida, the meal, the lunch. I never realized that, but I came to realize very quickly in Spain that everything in Spain revolves around la comida, the lunchtime meal. That's the important part of every day. And whereas we tend to laugh it off in South Africa, and you know, often people won't even eat at lunchtime and so on. There's no way that a Spaniard will miss his lunchtime. And his lunchtime has got to be sedate. It's got to be relaxed. It's got to be a time of pleasure. And doesn't matter what's happening on the course. It doesn't matter what's happening anywhere. Lunchtime is relaxed time. So at 2 o'clock, when we'd break for the afternoon, the Spaniards would all go to the mess, which was close by, part of the college's mess. So they'd all go to the mess. And they'd all sit down. They had these little round tables at the mess. Each table took 4 people. And they'd sit down, 4 of them at each table. And then they'd order their meal. And the meal was a very nice meal. There'd be a starter, and there'd be a main course, and then there'd be a dessert, and you'd have coffee during the meal, and wine. And the Spaniards had a very different approach to wine to what we have. They'll open a bottle of wine and pour a glass for each one, and they'll drink the wine with their meal. Sometimes they'll even get some mineral water to just water down the wine a little bit, add it to the wine, and drink it with that. And then when they finish their meal, they'll get up and go. And I mean, the meal might take them two, maybe even 3 hours. Because it's a social time. It's when they talk, and they talk about everything. They don't talk about the course now. They talk about everything else, about their families and about politics and about anything you can think of. They'll talk about, but they don't talk about the course during the mealtime. And when they get up to go, if there's still half a bottle of wine left, well, that's it. They've had their wine. They just have a glass with their meal. South Africans will squeeze that bottle until there's not a drop left in the bottle, but they're going to finish that bottle. The Spaniards don't do that. They don't get carried away about that. It supplements the meal. You know, the one guy said to me, but you don't shake the salt cellar until all the salt is out. When you put salt on your food, you just put a little bit on to add to the flavor. And the wine is the same. You just take enough to enjoy it with your meal. I had to adjust, and they had to adjust with me a little bit, because you know, they said to me, wine. I said, I don't drink any alcohol. The guy looked at me and he said, you don't drink wine? So I said, no. He said, but wine's not alcohol. Wine is wine. Everybody drinks wine. So I said, everybody except me. I don't drink any alcohol. So he said, well, you know, he doesn't understand that. But anyway, they accepted it eventually, but they would always shake their head when they'd see me, because I drink a glass of water or you know, orange juice or something, but not wine. They couldn't understand why I wouldn't drink wine. They said to me, you can't have a meal without wine. It's then it's not a meal. So, you know, I had to adjust to this idea of la comida, because then they would come back at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Now we've got to prepare for our presentation tomorrow, and we've got to get all the maps marked and everything ready, and we've got to write out the orders and all the rest of it. Now we get stuck into the work. We finish up at midnight. Some nights we work through the night to get the stuff done. And I say to them, guys, why don't we, when we finish our lectures at 2 o'clock, we start immediately working on this stuff? We could be finished by 8 o'clock tonight and go home and get a good night's rest. The guys look at me and they say, but what about lunch? And I'd say to them, we get some sandwiches. Let's say sandwiches are not lunch. I call it bocadillos. You know, it's sandwiches are not lunch. That's not lunch. You got to have lunch. No, forget it. No, I couldn't persuade them. That's not negotiable. Lunchtime is lunchtime, and that's when you break, and that's when you're going to have a leisurely meal, and you enjoy your wine, and you have no, you don't talk about anything to do with the course. You just relax and enjoy yourself and enjoy. This is a social time of the lunch. Now, you know, we do it late at night. We have a braai, and then that's regarded as our social time. That's not the way the Spaniards work. This is what they do. Anyway, it's something I had to adjust to. Anne used to make me sandwiches. I used to take the sandwiches to school, up to the college, and at 2 o'clock, when all the guys went off to the mess, I would sit in the classroom and eat my sandwiches, and then I'd do some extra work while I'm waiting for them until 5 o'clock when they come back. So from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock, that's lunchtime. You don't work on that. And in Madrid, and everybody in Madrid did that. In Madrid, they had 4 rush hours. They had rush hour in the morning, and then at 2 o'clock, there's another rush hour, and everybody goes home because they went home for their lunch. And then at 5 o'clock, there's another rush hour when they go back to work. And then at 8 o'clock, they all go home, and there's another rush hour. And that's why they only start work at 9 o'clock in the morning, you see. So you know, this was a bit of a culture shock to me, a bit of an adjustment to me. It's not the way we work, and the sense of urgency that we had. The Spaniards, you know, I don't know, but I think they probably didn't suffer much from heart attacks and strokes and things like that, because those 3 hours was relaxed time. You switched off then, and you didn't tense up, and you didn't get annoyed about anything. It were, you know, you talk about football and Barcelona and Real Madrid and those sort of things. You don't anyway, but that's the way it went. So that's the lunch break. Now, what I must also say about the lunch is that when we go and do a practical exercise, then you divide up into the syndicates, and you plan where you're going to go and so on. But before that, you do that, the guys all come together, and then they say, now, this is the area we're going to be working in. Who can give us a good idea for lunch? Because you go out early in the morning and you do your reconnaissance and so on, you come back late in the afternoon, and then you start preparing your presentation for the next day. And then one of the guys will say, they'll take the map and they'll say, this village over here, I know the guy who owns a restaurant in that place. And he will give us, because they give you an allowance when you go out to buy your lunch, you see. He will give us, for our allowance, he will give us He'll give us a starter of this, and this will be the main course, and this will be our dessert, and we'll get coffee and wine, and he'll add a cigar for our allowance. And the guys say, great, that's okay. So now we all go out and we plan our reconnaissance for the morning. But remember, at 2 o'clock, we're all meeting at this little village. So we got to be back there. So that's how they plan a reconnaissance when they go out. So I watched this sort of, and I shook my head. I thought, this can't be real. You know, these guys have got to be joking. But it was very real. That's the way it was. And then you get to that little village, and you have a marvelous meal, and everybody sits around there, and they enjoy themselves, and they have and they talk about everything, and they joke and laugh, and everybody's having fun. 5 o'clock. Back to the college, back to Madrid, and now we got to start working on preparing stuff for tomorrow. And I think to myself, I could have got a good night's sleep tonight. You know, if we'd finished our reconnaissance and gone straight back to the college and immediately prepared everything, then it wouldn't be. No. That's not the way they work. So, and it's not for me to say that that's the wrong way of doing it, because I think it's probably a far healthier way in terms of your mental health, in terms of your cardiac situation. So anyway, that's the way it goes. And then there was something that happened on one day during the course. I, much to the amusement of all my buddies in the class, and I had some really good friends. You know, the guy who sat right next to me when I arrived there, and I was sharing a desk with him. He was an artilleryman. Juan Gutierrez Castro. He was a wonderful guy, and he and I became a very, very good close friend. I'm still friends with him now. We're still in contact. And his wife and my wife became good friends. And he was an incredible help to me. He really helped me a great deal. He was a wonderful guy. He was also a qualified helicopter pilot because they had helicopters in the army in Spain. And they came out to visit us in South Africa a couple of years after the course, and I was able to arrange for him to go in a flight in an Alouette around the Cape Peninsula, and the pilot let him take over and fly for a while and so on. So it was, but Juan was he really became my best friend on the course, and we got on very well together. But I used to cycle to work. I can't remember just how far it was. I think our little village that we were in was about 11 kilometers from the college, which was in Madrid city itself. So I worked out a little route I could follow through the Parque del Oeste and I forget what it is, the Parque del Prado, I think it was. Anyway, these beautiful parks in Madrid. And I follow roads through these parks and so on, miss all the heavy traffic, and cycle to the school, and then cycle back afterwards. And I'd pack my uniform into a little rucksack, I put on my back, nicely pressed and so on, everything in, pack it into my back, cycle through. When I got to the college, I'd make sure I got there early enough to be able to have a shower, and then dress in my uniform. And then in the afternoon, I had a locker there that I could put my stuff into. And in the afternoon, if we weren't working late that evening, or if we were working late, I'd have a torch on my headlight on my bike. And of course, as you get closer to the summer, it's still bright daylight when at 8 o'clock at night. The sun is still up and so on. So. Anyway, I used to cycle through and cycle back in the evenings and so on, and it was good exercise, and the Spaniards, they thought it was hilarious. They thought it was really funny that I cycled. Why don't you take a bus? Well, I took a bus in the first few weeks and so on, but when I realized I could cycle, and I had my bike there, I used to do that. So one day I'm going to the college in the morning, and I cycle through, and I go up to the locker room, and I have a shower, and now I've got to put my uniform on because I've got to go through and be behind my desk you know, when the formal arrival of the instructors come, and, you know, if I'm not there, the guy's got to, the guy in charge, the student leader's got to report why I'm not there. And so now I had my shower and I get my uniform out, my shoes, my socks, my shirt, my beret, my underpants, my vest, my belt, my badges, everything is there, except my pants, my trousers. For some reason, I forgot to pack my trousers in. Shucks, what am I going to do now? I've got to be in the classroom in 5 minutes. Otherwise, I'm going to be too late. Now, where am I going to find trousers now? Yeah. And there's nobody there. I mean, the other guys are already in the classroom. The mess is basically empty. Some of the guys lived very far from Madrid, so they stayed in the mess during the course, but they were all gone. There was nobody there. What do I do now? Yeah. So I start running through all these lockers in the locker room. And every locker that hasn't got a lock on, I open the lockers and I go through and I check the lockers. Eventually, in one of the lockers, I find a pair of pants, but it's Spanish Army pants. Now, they're a different color from our Army pants. So now, how am I think it was, well, they're a dark color and ours are of a very light sort of Kalahari sand, fawn color. And now there's this almost chocolate colored pants that are hanging. So I think, well, now they kalfs in the pit. I've got to now, I must do what I have to do. You know? So I take these pants and I pull them on. They must have belonged to a really small Spaniard, because to try and get them around my waist, you know, I've got to pull my stomach in as far as I can. And, you know, I was carrying a lot less weight in those days than I am now. But it's still, I had to really, and eventually with great difficulty, I managed to button up the fly and to close the pants and get them on. I had my belt. I could put my belt on and wear that, but no pants. So now I look down and the pants are about that far from my shoes, you know. My socks sticking out below, and the pants are a bit creased too, you know. They're not looking too good. I mean, I'd made sure mine were ironed immaculately every day. There's no way around this. I've just got to make it work. So I'm out of there now. I've got about 2 minutes to get back to get into the classroom. So I run across the courtyard and into the main building and up the stairs and down the corridor, and I arrived there, and the class captains, the guys are all standing behind their desks already. The class captain's standing at the door, and he says, "Where have you been? Where have you been? Oh, we've been waiting for you. What's the problem?" He doesn't look at my pants. He's looking at me, so he doesn't worry about my pants. So I said, "No, I'm sorry. You know, I'll tell you the story later." So, you know, I slip through and I rush over to my desk and I sit there, stand there, and I'm ready. And Lieutenant Colonel Bahamonde comes in, who's the chief instructor, leading the others and striding down the middle and go take their place. And I'm standing, and our desk was right in front, you know, right in front. And Juan and me, and I sat there. I stood there. We had to sit down. And we went through the day. I made sure that I didn't walk around too much. I stayed close to my desk and so on. Nobody even noticed. Nobody even noticed that I had a pair of Spanish Army pants on, that they were a different color to the ones that I normally wear. If anybody did, they must have thought, "Oh, well, he's just wearing a different version of the uniform today," you know. So I got away with it, but it was a benode paar oomblikke there. I really didn't know how I was going to manage that. So yeah. Then towards the end of our course, towards the end of our second year, the course, at the end of every staff course, they take you to visit another country, and you see how the staff training is done in another country. You go to their staff college and you get lectures on that, and you visit some of the units in that country and so on. And, you know, I put in South Africa as a bid. I said, you know, you guys, we can go to South Africa. I'm sure you guys would be welcome to go there and so on. They were a bit wary of that because, you know, things were politically not so good. And as it is, I found out later that the politicians in Madrid, in Spain, and they already had a socialist government at that stage, they weren't aware of the fact that there was a South African coming to do the staff course. And I was the 5th South African to do this because it had been instituted when Franco was still the president of Spain, or the caudillo. And Franco, and you know, had been very right wing and was friendly towards South Africa, so he was quite happy for us to send guys over to attend their staff course. And I was the 5th one, so that's more than 10 years that it had been going now, because it was 2 years each time. But now Franco was long dead, and they had a socialist government, Felipe González, and but they didn't know that I was sitting there attending their course. There was also a guy at the Naval College and another one at the Air Force College. They hadn't been attending for as many years as what the Army guy had, but nobody really knew about us. So you know, we were okay. But if they'd requested permission for the whole course to go to South Africa, that would have caused a problem. So. And then, you know, a couple of the other foreigners on course with us, they said, what about it? You know, go to our country and so on. But we had, in the second year, we had a lot more foreigners on the course who just attended for the second year because they'd done their own staff course in their own countries. And one of them was a German. And this German, he was a marvelous guy. I was in contact with him for many years afterwards, but I've lost contact with him now. Hans-Georg Konert. Hans arranged for us to go to Germany. So we visited the German Bundeswehr, and we went to their Führungsakademie. And they gave us details of what how the Germans approach staff training. Very interesting. Again, something very completely different way of doing it. And, you know, it was interesting because both Spain and Germany have got some of the oldest staff colleges in the world. In fact, they started staff training way before many other countries did. And so they've got a long history of staff training and very historical roots to their staff training. So the visit to the German Bundeswehr was it was quite an eye-opener to me, and it was extremely interesting. And one of the things that they arranged for us at that stage, it was still West Germany, the Bundesrepublik. And the East Germany, the border between the two countries still existed at that stage, with the mines and the barbed wire and the sentries and the tank ditches and all the rest on it. And they actually arranged for us to go in helicopters. And we flew down the whole length from the Baltic Sea all the way down to the border. I can't remember whether it was Switzerland or with France, but right down in the south. We followed the border right down, the border between East and West Germany. And we landed a couple of times close to some of the lookouts there, and the East German guards looked at us very suspiciously, holding their AKs and so on. And I took photographs of them and took photographs out of the air as we would go traveling around so that was a fascinating visit. And you know, they took photographs of us too, the East Germans. And I often wonder, because of course I was wearing my uniform with my paratrooper beret and badge on and so on. And I wonder what they thought of that uniform. And I suppose the intelligence guys would have been able to identify it. So, so that was the Bundeswehr, which was a beneficial visit to me, really, and I think the Spaniards enjoyed that as well. Just a couple of words, Chris, about our life in Spain. Anne and I, soon after we arrived there, we linked up with a Southern Baptist missionary church in the city, Emmanuel Baptist Church. And so we attended that every Sunday that I was there. We went through. The girls attended the Sunday school, and as far as I could, given my workload, because it was quite a heavy workload, I participated in the activities of the school, and I gave some talks there. And at one stage I was running an adult Sunday school class for them. We made very good friends with the pastoral couple, the minister and his wife. They've both passed on now. They were quite old, nearing retirement at that stage, and they'd been doing missionary work in Spain for, I don't know, 30 years or something. So they were very fluent in Spanish. But the other interesting thing about it was that there were quite a few Americans who attended that church. And the reason was that at that stage, I believe it's closed now, but at that stage, there was a big American air base just outside Madrid, Torrejon. And at the air base, they had a whole village that accommodated the Americans. When you went in there, it was inside the base, and it was like going into another country. It was all the Americans lived there. They lived there they had the whole town. They built the houses. They were all built like American houses. Everything that happened on that village, Royal Oaks, it was called, Encinar de los Reyes, and everything that happened there. We made friends with some of those Americans and got to know them quite well and visited them there. It was a little piece of America. And everything in there. And, when we were visiting with the guys there at one stage, I was in the kitchen with him, and he opened the fridge to get something out. And I saw a carton of milk there, and it was a gallon of milk. And I said to him, where on earth did you get that? They don't use gallons in Spain. He said, no, we don't buy on the economy, meaning in Spain. We get all our food at the PX in the base. And I said, American food? He said, yes. He says, a C-130 flies in every day and delivers all the food. So they ate American food in this base. And it was all stuff that was, even the fresh vegetables and stuff like that was flown from America. Were flown over and landed there, and they ate that. I couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable how self-sufficient and contained they were, living in another country. They could, and some of them, I found out afterwards when I spoke to some of the other guys, there were some people there who arrived there and they did a 2-year stint or a 3-year stint at the Air Force Base there, and they stayed in that Royal Oaks, and they never went out. They were frightened to go into the Spanish area. They didn't speak any Spanish. They didn't want to mix with the Spaniards. The people we knew from the church weren't like that. We went with them, traveled around Spain and visited places with them and so on. We had very good friends there. Some of them we're still in contact with as well. Tim Jones, who lives in America, is still a good friend of ours. Facebook makes it possible to maintain all sorts of friends with people all over the place. So we had some good friends at the church, and the church, I think, was very valuable to us. It kept us, spiritually, it kept us alive, and it gave us for something that was important to us. It was such that with a course of this nature, where I only saw South Africans once a week, and that's when I would go to during the week. I'd find a day when I could, usually during the lunchtime break when the other guys are busy having their extended meal, then I'd walk to the South African embassy, which was not very far. I suppose it was a few kilometers, but it wasn't that far from the college. And I'd go up to the embassy and collect my post there. And then if the military attaché was in, I'd greet him. He had a secretary who had married a Spaniard who was a South African, and I'd chat to her for a few minutes. But other than that, I didn't see South Africans much. I spent most of the time with the Spaniards. I'd walk back and I'd got my post for the week and so on, and I'd drop off any post that I want sent, for Anne wants to send letters to anybody or so on. Because of course we didn't have Zoom and email and Facebook and those sort of things back then. So these friends of ours, the Spanish friends that we made, many of them lived in different parts of Spain, and they were amazingly hospitable. And they would invite us if there was a long weekend or any spare time somewhere, or during the over the Christmas and New Year period. And of course, they have Three Kings Day in Spain as well. So they have about a 2-week break over the Christmas, New Year period. Then they'd invite us to come and visit them and to spend time with them. And so, we had some of the most amazing exposures to different parts of Spain and to staying with the people and seeing what it's like in their homes and sharing their home lives with them. And Juan, my friend, he came from a little town known as Medina del Campo. And it's a very old town, tremendous history, a magnificent castle and all the rest. And we used to love going there. And Juan had a little place just outside of Medina. Almost like a little country house that he had there. He sold it now, and he and his wife live in the town itself. He's retired now as well. He also retired as a brigadier general. Juan was he was a very special friend, and he would show me around. He'd take me do the things that the Spaniards did, and take me. They'd go out hunting rabbits. And take me along with them and show me how they did that. Some of the farmers in the area and so on. And Juan had properties and farm properties in the area, and he'd take me along and introduce me to the people who lived there and so on. So we had wonderful exposure to the Spanish life, and we were living with the Spaniards. The house that we lived in, there was only Spaniards living around us. Anne made friends with the neighbors and the people who lived over the road, and she would greet the people in the mornings, and they would come out onto their balconies. And when she'd go down to the little village and do some shopping at the little shops there, she'd chat to the people in the, Anne has a very different approach to things to what I have. I have Anne is a generalist. I tend to be a precisionist. I want things to be exactly right. To Anne, as long as they're generally okay, that's fine. And so that was our approach to language as well. To me, it was very important that I get the tense right, and that I get the vocabulary right, and that I get these irregular verbs sorted out so that they make sense. So sometimes the Spaniards would get quite irritated with me because I would take so long to explain a thing, because I'm thinking all the time how to put the language in a way that it's going to sound reasonable. I'm not going to mess up their language. That sort of thing didn't bother Anne. She learned the present tense, and then she'd tell them something, and she'd say ayer, yesterday. In other words, it's already happened. It's what I'm telling you now is something that's already happened. Or she'd tell them something and she'd say mañana. That means tomorrow. So that's future tense. She's not going to struggle with the tense. That's good enough. And the Spaniards loved it. They laughed and they chatted with her and they understood her perfectly, And I'd listen to it and I'd think, oh, my wife's going to embarrass me with this sort of thing. It didn't bother them at all. They thought it was wonderful. And Anne's a very gregarious person. She enjoys being with people and she likes communicating with people. So she did. She had no problem at all. So she would meet people in the streets and she would chat to them in her broken Spanish. And they all understood her, and they managed all my efforts to speak it with precision and exactitude and correctly. And often they'd look at me and they wouldn't understand what I'm saying. So Anne has a much more relaxed approach to life than what I have. We had other friends on the course who were not Spaniards. by the time we only had 4 people in the foreigners on the first year, but in the second year, they allowed foreigners to come who had attended their own staff course, could just attend the second year of the Spanish staff course. And there were a total of 11 of us all together. And it included an American and a German and a Portuguese and an Italian and and quite a few other South and Central American countries and so on. And these guys, I don't know why, but the Spaniards used to refer to all of us, the foreigners, as the Giris. I'm not sure what that means, but it was their sort of jocular term for us, and we carried it with pride. So we were the Giris. And if they were talking something and they said, no, but the Giris are not included in this, or the Giris must divide up amongst the people like that and so on. So we were the Giris. And we made good friends with that group of 10 other foreigners. And in the second year, we used to once a month, all the Giris would get together with their wives and have a little function. It's one each time at a different one's house. We'd all get together there and crowd into the house, and then we'd bring food, different food from that's popular in our countries, and we'd share that out, and we play music and we dance and we we developed a really good friendship. And we used to have some roaring parties at some stages at that thing. And as happens in Spain, and I found that many of the South and Central American countries, their approach was the same. They invite you now to come around to my place this month. And time to arrive, 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock at night. I mean, that's crazy. But we only finished work at 8 o'clock at the college. So and then they'll go home at 2 o'clock in the morning, so that's it was a different way of life and a different way of doing things. But we had some wonderful parties with the Giris, and the wives really enjoyed one another. And the interesting thing was that when we were together as a group, the foreigners, quite a few of them spoke English, and of course the American was his home language, and he and I had some long discussions at times because we could speak freely and comfortably in our own language. And I'm still in contact with him too, Carl Wikstrom. He's a friend in also retired now, spends part of his life, he and his wife, in France. They've got a place in France as well. So they all became very good friends of ours, and our wives really enjoyed being with one another and chatting away to one another. So the common language that we all spoke was Spanish. So when all the Giris were together, we spoke Spanish, and a large number of the Giris were Spanish speaking anyway. But I remember one occasion, we were doing an exercise along the Mediterranean coast of Spain, and we were at a place called Malaga. And this one evening, we were out. The guys went out for a walk and so on. We weren't working that evening, and we were staying in a hotel in that area. And I think it was myself, the German, the Italian, and the American. I think it was the four of us. We were walking down the beachfront together, chatting. So, and the Spaniards are great on these little coffee bars that they've got all over the place. And you go inside. It's advertised as a bar, but you go in and you can have a strong cup of coffee there, or not so strong, depending on what you want. And they have tapas, these little snacks that they make available. And you order some tapas and you stand around and you chat in the pub, and you if you want to have some alcohol, they sell it there, but most of us would drink coffee and so on. And we were chatting as we walked along the beachfront, and one of the guys said, "Yeah, there's a bar. Let's go in and have a coffee." And so we went in, and we're standing around chatting at the counter. And this the barman is looking at us, And we chat away, and eventually you could see this guy he couldn't keep his curiosity in anymore. So he said, "Excuse me, gentlemen." He said, can I ask you where you come from? So he said, "Oh, this guy's from South Africa, and this guy's from Germany, and this guy's from Brazil, and this guy's from Italy, and so on." He said, "Oh, so why do you speak Spanish?" So he said, well, we, that's the one language that we all understand, so we speak Spanish. So he said, "No, thank you. I just wondered, because I'd never heard anybody speaking such bad Spanish as you people speak." So it must have been confusing for him. So anyway, that's the friends that we had. Now, another thing I want to just mention is that when I got there, I was speaking to the Air Force student, South African, at the Air Force Staff College. And he said to me, he'd already been there for a year. So he was only there for my first year. Then he went back to South Africa. Mac van der Merwe, who was a fighter pilot. And he said to me, "You're going to buy yourself a car while you're here?" So I said, "Well, why? What?" And he said, "No, you can get a car. If you get a letter from the embassy, you can get a car at a diplomatic price, and it's much cheaper. And if you buy it a year before you go back, if you've been driving it for a year in Spain before you go back to South Africa, you can take it back to South Africa. The state will pay for it to go back, and you won't have to pay any import tax on it." So I said, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." So I said to him, "So what did you get?" He said, "Come and I'll show you." And he took me out and he had a Mercedes-Benz station wagon. Now, in those days, you didn't even get a station wagon in South Africa. And I looked at it, I said, "Wow." I said, "No," I said, that's beyond what I'd never be able to afford a Mercedes-Benz." So he said, "Go and speak to them at the Mercedes-Benz agency and find out." So I went through to the Mercedes-Benz place and I spoke to them. And they said, "Diplomatic price, you can get a letter from your embassy. This is," and I looked at that lot and I thought, wow. And I went back and I said to Anne, if we save our money carefully, in a year's time, we would be able to buy that car. So she said, "Well, let's do it." So we did. So we saved our money very carefully. We were quite judicious with our money. And after we'd been there a year, we ordered this thing, and when we paid for it, and we arranged with them that we would go and collect it at the factory in Stuttgart. So when the holiday came, the holiday period, for the summer, the second summer we were going to be in Spain. Now this is between the two courses, the first and second year. What happened then was that you get a month's leave, and then the Spaniards have to all go to a headquarters and do practical work at a headquarters for 2 months. And then we start our second year of the course. But the foreigners weren't allowed to do the practical phase at the headquarters. So, I went to the embassy and saw the military attaché, and I said to him, "Look, this is what happens now. What am I going to do for those 2 months? Are you going to send me back to South Africa?" So he says, "No, that's not cost effective. We can't send you back to South Africa." He said, and I can't, I've got nothing for you to do here at the embassy. There's nothing you can do. So what you're going to do is you're going to fill in a leave form for that period. And I'm going to keep the leave form here in my drawer. And if you come back and you're safe and sound, I'll tear up the leave form. So you won't lose any leave. But if anything happens to you, then you're covered because you're actually officially on leave. I've got the leave form. So I said, well, thank you very much, sir. That's very kind of you. So I had a summer period of 3 months at my disposal. Now I've got to decide how I'm going to use this. So I decided, first of all, we're going to go to Germany. We're going to leave the kids with friends over here. And Anne and I are going to get in the train. And we're going to go on the train all the way to Germany and to Stuttgart. And we're going to collect our new car. And then we're going to drive back with a new car. And when we get back to Spain, we're going to pick up the kids. We're going to hitch my trailer, which had, my trailer with the OB registration number had gone all the way to Spain with us with all my stuff, because they transported all my stuff in the computer, in the container. So I had my trailer there and all our camping gear, because Anne and I always camped for our holidays. We had all our camping gear, and we had that. We're going to hitch that up, and then we're going to tour Europe. So when the time comes, now we order the car in our own. We tell them at the agents how we want the factory to make this car. First thing we say, it must be a right-hand drive. Right, so they're going to produce the car with a right-hand drive. Secondly, it mustn't be marked, because Mac van der Merwe said to me, make sure you tell them that you want the speedometer to be in kilometers, not in miles. Because if you tell them you want a right-hand drive, they automatically put it in miles per hour, because they think you're going to take it to England. So tell them you want it in kilometers, but you want a right-hand drive. So I told them, so they did that. So I tell them you want, because Mac gave me all the, Mac van der Merwe, he gave me all the tips on this. He said, tell them you want 5-speed gearbox. So I said, do you get a 5-speed? He said, yeah. He said, you don't get it on a Mercedes in South Africa, but over here you can get it a 5-speed. So I ordered a 5-speed. And you know, all sorts of little things like that, that extras that I got built into this car. So Anne and I get on the train and we go through, and we go through to Paris, and we have to change trains in Paris, and then we go through to Stuttgart. So we get to Paris, but now there's almost a whole day in between when we arrive and when our train to Stuttgart leaves. So we got a day in Paris. So we take the underground and we're off, and we go and visit the Eiffel Tower and the Seine and the Arc de Triomphe, and we're really enjoying all of these. Anne's been there before. For me, it's the first time. And before we were married, she'd toured Europe, and so she'd been in these places before. So she was showing me around and so on. And you know, we bought some French bread, and we didn't get wine, but I got something to drink, and we sat on the banks of the Seine and watched the boats go by and all the rest. Anyway, now it's getting time for the train to Stuttgart, so we've got to get back to the station. I forget what the guard the station was. It's named after one of these big battles or so on. But anyway, we head back there, and we're on the underground, the metro now, and we're heading back. And I'm getting a bit worried because, you know, we're running out of time now. And I look at the stations as we stop at them, and I look at the thing that's up on it shows you a list of all the stations you go through. And I say to Anne, we're going the wrong direction. This is taking us away from the station. So the next station we hop off, and now we've got to go all the way around and get onto the platform on the other side. We've got to get another train, and but now we're running late. Anyway, we got to the station, but it was too late. Our train for Stuttgart had left. We'd missed it. So now I've got to make another booking, you see. So now I go to the counter, and there's a girl sitting behind the counter. And now I've been warned, don't speak English to the French, because that just annoys them. They can't stand English. Speak any language you like, but don't speak English to them. So I go up to this counter now, and I say to the girl there, hablo usted español? So she looks at me and she shakes her head. So I said, spreek u Hollands? Shakes her head. So now I'm desperate. Now I've run out of languages now. So I said, praat jy dalk Afrikaans? She shakes her head. Now I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do now. So she looks at me and she says, don't you speak English? So I said, yes, a little bit. So then I got the ticket and we managed to get to. But people have assured me if I'd started off with English, she wouldn't have helped me. So anyhow, we got to Germany, to Stuttgart, and we took delivery of our car, and they took us on a tour through the factory, and it was an amazing experience. And I bought a couple of little extra odd things there that tickled my fancy, because I was at the factory and I could get them, and a little model of the first Mercedes-Benz or Daimler-Benz that was ever built, and a little toy model of my car as well, that I could have, which I've still got in my cupboard somewhere. And so then we headed back, and we came back via Switzerland, and we camped at one of the lakes in Switzerland for the night, and carried on and went through France and back, and eventually arrived back. And on the way back, we went through Andorra, and I bought a nice camping fridge up in Andorra, because it's all duty-free stuff up there. And nobody's ever heard of Andorra, but it's one of the places we wanted to go to, so we went there. Very strange sort of setup politically, because the political head of Andorra it's shared by two people: the president of France and the bishop of Urgel in Spain. They're jointly the head of the little principality of Andorra. And then we went back to collect our kids, and we packed everything up. Now, in Spain, they had the strange system with the registering of motor cars and trailers. If you register a trailer, it gets the same registration number as your car. And only your car may tow that trailer, and they have the same registration number. So now we wanted to tour with our new station wagon, you see. And we wanted the station wagon to pull our trailer, but our trailer had an OB registration number, but I couldn't register it in Spain because it has to be registered with the same registration number as my car. We had a little Citroen that we bought in Spain that we used to use before we got the Mercedes, but it didn't have a hook on, and we weren't going to tour with that, so that didn't help. So one of the guys said to me, look, your Mercedes-Benz, when I took delivery of it, it had a German registration number. They had registered it. It was all ready for us when we collected it. So they said, look, your car's got a German registration number. Just hook your trailer on it. When they see it's a registration number, nobody's going to worry about it. So I did, and we traveled through Europe with a trailer with an OB registration number and the German car's registration, and no policeman stopped us. Nobody worried about it. It was fine. And then we headed off on our tour. Now we've got nearly 3 months, so we'd worked out a very specific route that we were going to go. And I set certain goals. First of all, one of the goals was to visit the obscure leftover feudal principalities that exist in Europe in funny places. And so that was one of my goals, to visit these places, because people don't normally go to them. People don't even know about them. So, and these included places like Monaco, like the Republic of San Marino in the middle of Italy, like the Vatican City, which is not part of Italy. It's a little country on its own. The Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, so all of these little places, and Andorra, of course, which we've now been to. So I wanted to visit all of those places. So we worked out a route that would include them. Anne had certain places that she'd visited when she toured Europe before we were married, that she really wanted to go back to again. Paris was one, and we'd been to Paris now, but she also wanted to go to Venice and one or two other places. So we went there. We also wanted to go some places that the kids would enjoy too. So we included Salzburg in Austria, and we also wanted to visit the the area where they'd filmed The Sound of Music, the film The Sound of Music. So that was very exciting for the kids. And then I wanted to visit selected battlefields and military cemeteries. In other words, places of interest for me as a military man. So, you know, we included Castiglione di Pepoli in Italy, the Second World War military cemetery where all the South Africans are buried. I included the Gran Sasso, where Mussolini was held by the Germans, by the Italians, and the Germans sent in the glider force up on the mountains, and they, with Otto Skorzeny, and they rescued him and took him back to Hitler. An amazing airborne operation, Special Forces airborne operation. And I wanted to see that, you know, the area, because I'd read about it in detail, and I wanted to see the place where they'd actually carried that out. I wanted to visit Delville Wood in France, where the South Africans killed in the First World War on the Western Front are buried. And I wanted to go to the battlefield itself. I wanted to visit the Normandy battlefields, where the Normandy landings had taken place and where the airborne forces had dropped in Normandy. I wanted to go to Arnhem and see the battlefield at Arnhem and the areas where the Americans dropped and so on. So I wanted to have a good look at that. And then in the UK, I wanted to go to the field of Culloden in northern Scotland, where the last battle on British soil took place, where some of my ancestors fought from my Scottish ancestors. So I had specific goals that I wanted. I also wanted to attend the Edinburgh Festival, and specifically the tattoo, the military tattoo at the Edinburgh Festival. So we had to fit that in date-wise and so on. And we made all the reservations in advance and sorted all of that out. And I also wanted to attend the Farnborough Air Show in England. So we included that in our little. And I wanted to go to the Imperial War Museum in London. So, you know, these were specific places we wanted to visit, and we worked out our whole route so that we would include all of those. And it was marvelous. I mean, when I got to Gran Sasso, the cableway wasn't working. So we pitched camp down at the bottom, and Anne and the kids stayed there, and I packed some food for myself, and I climbed up the mountain all the way up to the hotel right on the top. And I took photographs, and I went, and the hotel wasn't functioning. It was empty, but deserted. But I was able to see where the gliders had landed and where the Fischler Storch aircraft took off with Mussolini and Skorzeny in it, and nearly fell down the end of the mountain. And I could do, you know, get a very good idea of exactly how it went on. I took all the photographs from the right angles and so on. And then I had to go all the way down to get back to the campsite again. At Arnhem, we camped at Arnhem, and I hired a bicycle. And I spent, I think it was 3 days, just riding around to all the DZs and looking at the distances and the places that they went to and where they had the engagements and the battles and so on. It was a magnificent tour that I gave myself there. Visited the Airborne Museum and you know, took a lot of photographs and so on. So we managed to do all of those things, and we actually visited 16 different countries during those 3 months, and it was amazing. You know, places which I had only read about and dreamt about, but had never been able to get to, and places which were very meaningful for me. And the way we did it was we had a big tent that we'd used in South Africa that had lots of space in it. It had 2-3 different compartments in it, and if we were staying for more than 1 day, we'd put up the big tent. But if it was just overnight, then we had a little pup tent that we'd put up. Anne and I would sleep in that, and the kids would sleep in the back of the car. And while we were traveling, the kids normally sat in the back. They could play around. We put down the back seat, so there's a big area for them. And we limited ourselves. We only did, you know, maybe 250, 300 kilometers a day. And then we would camp. So the kids didn't get too bored. And then what we would do is we'd find a campsite outside of a big city like Rome. And we'd find a campsite a little distance away that had all the facilities that we need, but that had a railway station nearby. And then we'd leave all our stuff in the campsite and we'd get on a train and we'd take the train into Rome and pack all our food into rucksacks and so on, and take water and so on with us. And then we'd walk around, and we wouldn't have to go and buy at the exorbitant prices the way they rip the tourists off and so on. We got the stuff at little places where tourists never go, and it didn't cost us an arm and a leg. And then we'd walk around inside Rome, and we'd visit the Colosseum, and go to the Vatican City and St. Peter's and all the other things we want to do. And then in the evening we'd take a train back to the campsite, and then if necessary the next day we'd go in again and do. And we did that in London. We spent almost a week in Switzerland, because at that stage we'd been on the road for quite a while, and we thought we want to rest a bit. So at a place called Ringenberg, which was close to Interlaken, we camped there, beautiful campsite, and we went for walks in the mountains and the forests and so on, and it gave us a chance to rest up a bit and not just be traveling all the time. And then we carried on. We went through Bern, and we went on to Germany and through the Black Forest, and we went into Luxembourg and the Netherlands and Belgium and back into France, and then we crossed over to England, and we went to Scotland, and we went to Wales, and we really had a marvelous holiday. It was absolutely magnificent. And how else would we have been able to do it? I mean, it didn't cost us very much, because we weren't eating out. We would prepare our own food with our camping gear in the campsite. We bought our food at supermarkets or little shops and so on. So it cost us what it would have cost us to eat at home in Spain. We had our own transport there. We didn't have to pay for an expensive air ticket to get to Europe. We didn't have to hire a car. We had our own car. So it was basically our petrol and our campsites that we stayed at. And the European campsites then, I imagine it's the same now, but in those days, we had a book of all the campsites in Europe. And that book you could open up and find a campsite near to the city or the place that you wanted to go to. And it listed all the facilities that the campsite had. And if you needed to do washing, you chose a campsite that had a laundromat. And if you wanted the kids to relax a bit, you chose a campsite that had a playground for children. All of that. And if you wanted one with a shop in the campsite, it was all listed. Marvelous book that we used to select our campsites as we traveled. And we had some wonderful adventures. We met some great people. We saw places all over, and from a military point of view, the opportunity to go to some of those places and see them firsthand. Of course, there are lots of other places I would like to have seen, but I mean, we had to put a limit on what we were doing. So that was Europe, and we came back, and then I started the second year, and it was a very special experience. And then the last thing I must mention is that inside Spain and Portugal, which was right next to Spain, we traveled a great deal. We traveled visiting our friends. We traveled when there was a break in the course for anything. Sometimes we took a weekend and we just went to places that were not too far. Because I had a Spanish ID, I could go to any mess anywhere in Spain and just show them my ID, and they'd book me into the mess, and it would cost us next to nothing to stay there. So, it was an incredible advantage that we had. And besides Medina del Campo, where Juan Castro lived, and where we used to spend a lot of time, a lot of weekends and so on, and we really got to know his family very well, and his kids were more or less the same age as our kids, and they became friends, and Anne and Marie Carmen, his wife, became very close friends, and they still are to this day. We visited them several times in Spain since then, and stayed with them. They've been out to South Africa and visited us over here, and they're just very special friends. But we also stayed with some of the course members at Zaragoza, Mallorca. One of the guys lived on the island of Mallorca, and we flew to Mallorca and we spent a long weekend there with them, and they lent us their car and they told us where to go to and took us to places. It was magnificent. And another friend stayed in a place called Ceuta, which is on the North African coast, surrounded by Morocco. There are two such enclaves in Morocco, which belong to Spain, Ceuta and Melilla. And we went to Ceuta, and we were able to, at that stage, South Africans, you couldn't really go many places in Africa, but we were able to go to the border and actually step over the border and to have a photograph taken with the Moroccan guard who was standing there, and to say we went into Morocco. Technically that's right, even if we just stepped over the border to be there. And the history around Ceuta and why it exists, and of course we went to Granada, and we visited the Alhambra, the Arabian Palace, magnificent from the time when the Moors had occupied Spain. Just such incredible places that we went to. We had close friends who we met at a function we went to, who were South Africans who were living in Spain. He worked for Lever Brothers, and he'd been sent there for work reasons for a few years. And they'd been in Spain for a while when we arrived, and they remained there for a while after we left. So they spent a lot of time in Spain, and he and his wife were fluent in the language. And the Reimers, Penny and Rob Reimers, and they became very close friends. And to this day, they're good friends of ours. We're still in regular contact with them, and we visited each other in our homes quite a bit. And we went with them. We went to Portugal with them, and we spent time on the Algarve and in Lisbon and so on with them, in camping over there. And we went up into the Picos de Europa, which are right up in the north of Spain. Magnificent mountains, and we stayed up there, and we hired a little place that we stayed in, and we just had such wonderful adventures around Spain and the area, visiting different parts of Spain, places which many people wouldn't really know about. And then, to my surprise and to my great pleasure, when I started at the beginning of the year 1985, I had 6 months left because, of course, their academic year starts in the middle of the year. And I had 6 months left on the course. And lo and behold, my promotion comes through to Lieutenant Colonel, Commandant, as we called it in those days. So that was rather nice. I'd started off the course as a major. All the Spaniards had started the course as captains, but they were all promoted to major. And just when they were promoted to major, I was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. So that was rather nice. And of course, I was told then that your time at One Parachute Battalion, I'd remained on strength at One Parachute Battalion all the time that I was in Spain. But now I was told you're being transferred to the Army College. There is the agreement is you go to Spain for 2 years, you come back, got to spend 2 years at the Army College as a member of the directing staff, plowing back what you've learned over there into the South African system, which is quite fair enough. So that's what happened. When we left, we had the most wonderful farewell functions and parties and various other things. The Spaniards had still had to go and do 6 months practical in headquarters before they graduated. And all my predecessors had been flown back to Spain because we weren't allowed to go and do the practical. But they'd all been flown back to Spain to attend the graduation and to get when you qualify on the Spanish staff, you get what is called a faja. It's like a sash, a beautiful embroidered sash, that the blue, which is the color of their staff corps, that you wrap around your uniform, around your tunic, and you tie a certain knot, and it's got lovely gold tassels that hang from it. And the people who are staff qualified, they wear that. And so then you get this presented to you. And it's presented by the guy who comes first on the course. It's presented to him by the King of Spain. And the guy who comes second on the course, it's presented to him by the Minister of Defense. And the guy who comes third on the course, it's presented to him by the Chief of the General Staff. And then the guy who comes fourth is presented to him by the Chief of the Army. And so it goes on. So it's a huge thing, this whole, when these things are presented, and they're actually tied on around the guy's middle with the special knot that they use. The foreigners, theirs are all presented to them by the military attaché of their country in Spain. So I was looking forward to this, 6 months' time after I get back, I'll be there. But we had some lovely functions and things to say goodbye to one another. And the guys, drew pictures and they wrote poems and songs about everybody. And there was many tears, and the girls, all the wives were very sad to be saying goodbye to the foreign wives because they wouldn't see them again. But it was wonderful. The guy who sent me to Spain, the officer commanding 1 Parachute Battalion, Colonel Anton van Graan, had in the meantime been appointed as the military attaché in Israel. So he and his wife, who is also a good friend of Anne's, they invited us to, when we go back to South Africa, to do so via Israel and to spend some time with them. So I took some leave and we went through and we spent, I think it was 2 weeks we spent with them in Israel. And they took us all over and showed us all over in Israel. Now, I'd been to Israel before, but it was nice to take Anne there and take the girls there and show them the Sea of Galilee and swim in the Dead Sea with them and go to Jerusalem and all the other things. So that is a wonderful opportunity to do that. But then we were back in South Africa, and I had to report at the Army College, and we were given a military masonette in Voortrekker Hoogte to live in. We had to wait for our stuff to arrive. We stayed in the mess at the Army College until our stuff arrived from Spain. When the time came for me to graduate, the socialist government in Spain had discovered that these South Africans are attending the course there. So the guy who took over from me as to do the next course, he was sent back. He couldn't finish his course. And I was denied permission to go over and graduate. So they sent me my faja in the post. I didn't get it on in a big parade where the King of Spain was there and all the rest. But we did manage, before we left, the Giris, all the foreigners, we made an arrangement. We requested an audience with the King of Spain, just so that we as the foreigners could go and thank him for the privilege we've had of attending the course. So we did that, and we went to the palace, and all of us, the foreigners, and in our uniforms, and we met with the king, and he came through and spoke to us, greeted each one of us, and chatted to us for a while, and of course he was interested to hear that I was from South Africa, because his wife, Queen Sophia, who's now the Queen Mother, she'd actually lived in South Africa during the Second World War, because she's a Greek princess. And the Greek royal family were exiled, and they came and lived in South Africa, and they actually lived with Jan Smuts at Irene. And her sister was born there here in South Africa. And she was born in Irene, and that's why she was given the name Irene. So Princess Irene was born in Irene and just outside of Pretoria. And so, it was... the king just commented on it. We didn't discuss it in any way, but he said, "Oh, my wife knows South Africa well." And so she lived there as a child. So anyway, we did manage to see the king, and but I couldn't go back for my graduation. But I was now appointed as a member of the directing staff at the Army College. And I had to now start adjusting to the course, that there was a staff course on the go at that stage, and now I had to assist with the lectures and so on. But I also was given a few other tasks to do. One of them was to look after, because there were foreigners on our course as well. You know, we had guys from various South American countries, Chile, Paraguay. We had a guy from Israel. So we had a number of other countries who sent people to our staff course, and I was placed sort of in charge of the foreigners, and I had to take them on visits and tours to other places during the course, which was interesting, and I enjoyed that. And they were very nice guys, and I'm still in contact with one of them, Julio Silva, Chilean, who's kept in contact with me. So it was very interesting to be back at the college. But I didn't do a great deal at the college because, as I'll perhaps discuss in the next talk, I was pulled away after just 6 months at the college as a DS, as a member of the directing staff. But while I was there, I translated the Spanish airborne doctrine into English, so that we had a copy of their airborne doctrine, because they had quite a comprehensive airborne doctrine, far more so than what we had at that stage. So I was very pleased to get that. So I think next time, of course, I'll speak about the what happened, why I had to leave the college, and how I came to now return to the paratroops and go to the headquarters at 44 Parachute Brigade. You know, it's I think a good point to end here, but I think I must end by saying that I've now reached this. This was the end of 1985. I had been in the permanent force for exactly 10 years. And as I said right in the beginning, when I started speaking about it, that decade, that first decade, and it's taken me 4 of these sessions to get through that first decade, or 4, I don't know, 3 sessions, however many it was, but to get through that first decade. But that decade was an amazing time in my life and in my military career, because I did all the training that was required of me in South Africa. I was served intensely operationally and participated in a lot of operations, saw a fair amount of action. I trained paratroopers from scratch all the way up to when they were deployed operationally. I served in various positions, including not just being a company commander, but being an adjutant and being the SO2 training and being 2IC of the training battalion. I was able to go to the military academy and get my degree. I was sent to 3 different countries to do very relevant and worthwhile courses: pathfinders in Israel, commando course in Chile, and the staff course in Spain. I'd learned another language. By the time I left Spain, I was speaking the language quite fluently, and I had to give some lectures to the staff on things that took place in South Africa. I was able to do that without too much difficulty. I gave speeches at some of the functions. I submitted tasks that were written in Spanish. I don't think it was wonderful Spanish, but it was probably understandable, including detailed tasks on NATO and Warsaw Pact, and you know, on South Africa's participation in the Second World War that I did for them, and South Africa's medical service, which is run on a very different basis to the way they do the medical service over there. So it was a wonderful decade, a wonderful 10 years, which I don't think many people have had the intensity of. It was exhausting. It was exhausting for me. It was exhausting for Anne. I think it was exhausting for our kids, but it was a wonderful time, a wonderful exposure. So if we can end there, thanks.
It was indeed wonderful, sir. And it's wonderful for us to listen to you. I say again, thank you. As you were talking, I was thinking I live in Switzerland now. Very true about the wine and the Europeans. They do drink their wine with everything they eat. That's the way
Yeah,
they do it. The camping sites is just fantastic. It's
yeah,
out
they
of
are.
this world. All the conveniences are there. Some cities are a bit strange when it comes to these camper van type of vehicles.
Yeah,
We have a bit of a dislike, but mostly the culture is something else. You can really go and see all the battlefields which you read about at school and everywhere else. That's fantastic. I think anybody, any South African who goes to France and not visit Double Wood should really look at himself.
yeah,
And I think if you stand at Double Wood and you imagine what was happening there, it's a fantastic period of South African military history, First World War. Um, and you see those thousands of graves around you.
yeah,
Then you realize what war is. It's not two or three
correct.
people dying. In a European sense of a war, it's a major thing. Even now, of course, with this trouble in Russia and Ukraine, you can hear the air raid sirens being tested, and
Yeah,
you're reminded that you have a bunker below every building, that
yeah,
roofs are thickened to
yeah,
protect against
reinforced.
fireballs, things like that. So you can feel that tension building up. So it's different. It's not the same as Africa. Between the two, I would love Africa a lot more. But now I have a few questions for you, sir.
Yes, of course.
Those, well, let me start with the obvious. You didn't have a Battle of the Beret game like you had at the military academy. You could wear your well-earned paratrooper beret without anybody being obnoxious.
Yeah, well, as I said, Chris, while I was doing the staff course, I was still on the strength of one parachute battalion. So, there was no question about that. That was my unit. I wore the one parachute battalion flashes on my shoulders. And it was part of my service at one parachute battalion. If I'd been sent on the South African staff course, I would also have still been a member of one parachute battalion. So it was exactly the same. So that was not an issue at all. No. I'm grateful for that.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that too, sir. But now, in those days, we were the anti-apartheid movements. And they were quite vocal. I wouldn't call them violent, but they had a lot to say. Were you never feeling threatened, perhaps, by wearing a South African military uniform? Not that many people would actually know what it is. While you were
No, I didn't, Chris. In Spain, the average Spaniard knows very little about South Africa. Many of them don't even know that South Africa is a country. If you say so, it's like South America. It's the southern part of Africa. So it was not a big issue in Spain. The people. It was only when the government discovered that we had South Africans on course there that they got bolshy about it. But the man in the street, the people in Spain, it was no issue. The Spaniards on course with me. One has to remember that the Spanish Civil War only ended on the eve of the Second World War. So, we're talking about 40 years later. I'm on just over 40 years, and I'm on course in Spain. The survivors of the Spanish Civil War, many of them were still alive. And the victors in the Spanish Civil War, that was Franco and his coalition of people who tended to mostly be right-wing. So within the Spanish army, most of the guys came from a family that had supported Franco during the Spanish Civil War. There were some who didn't. There was one guy who on the course with us who was openly a communist. But the things had changed, and it wasn't held against him. People sometimes laughed and joked with him about his communist sympathies and so on. But even he had no problem with me. He treated me as an individual, and he treated me very, very civilly and well. So I had no particular problem there. In the rest of Europe, we did encounter occasionally. We'd come up against somebody while we were camping and so on. We'd come up against somebody who would be, when they'd realize that we're South Africans, they would get a sudden very harsh attitude, and they would either refuse to speak to us or just turn their backs on us and walk away and so on. So, but they were from other countries. I don't even know in some cases which countries. There were a few little instances like that, but nothing of particular significance. We were very careful too. The 16 countries we visited were all countries which South Africans were allowed into. So we were very careful about the route that we followed, and we didn't have any problems crossing those countries. We never had problems at any of the border posts and with customs and immigration. In London, we walked around and we went to shops and we bought things, and we told people that we were South African. It didn't seem to bother anybody. So I think it was a relatively small, very vocal group, which is generally the case with activists. They like to pretend that they represent everybody, but generally they, anyway.
I was about to ask you, sir, about the Spanish Civil War, whether there was any mention of it during the course that you studied, or was it too close perhaps to comfort, or any monuments, things like that?
The Spanish Civil War?
Yes, the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah, of course, the only time we really studied it was in the second year when we were doing military history. We did one section on the crossing of the Ebro. Now, the Ebro is a fairly big river in Spain, and the crossing of the Ebro by the nationalist forces was quite an accomplishment. It was a very difficult operation because they crossed it in several different places, and there were large forces involved. I mean, we're talking about divisions now, a large number of divisions on both the Republican side and the nationalist side. But at this stage, the Republicans were already, they were losing the war. They were on the defensive, very much on the defensive, and the nationalists were aggressively trying to take Barcelona, and so they needed to cross the Ebro to do this. And as I say, it's a big river, and it's a huge thing to get across it. And they did. Although the Republicans defended it very, very well, and they actually sent forces across to try and prevent them. But ultimately the war was already lost at that stage. But we studied that because in tactics and logistics, in the second year, crossing of water obstacles was a specific specialist case that we looked at in tactics and logistics, and so they considered the crossing of the Ebro as a very good example for us to study of how this was done. So that's the only time we really examined anything to do with the Spanish Civil War. Generally, I didn't notice any political issues being discussed. I didn't notice them. I'm sure they must have felt very strongly about a lot of political issues. And sometimes when we spoke to the wives, they were far less diplomatic than they were husbands. They tended to venture forth with their political opinions and so on. And some of them were not impressed with the socialist government that they had at that stage. So.
Well, it's a fascinating country, Spain. I believe that Ortiz Corzini ended up in Spain. He died there. He fled out of Germany after the war. And then, of course, we had, I think it was in 1936, we had the bombing attack on Giersny. If I say the word correctly, the town which got bombed by, I believe, the Germans, the German Air Force. Which was like an open city being bombed from the air. That caused a lot of outcry And then during the Second World War, we had Fanta Orange. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But apparently, the story goes that the Coke factories ran out of some ingredients that were used oranges, and from that came something called Fanta Orange. That's the story. Whether it's true or not, I really don't know. One of those things. But I have to ask you a question, sir, about the staff course in general. Do you think there should be a lot of pressure on the students all the time, like in a war situation? Or should it be more laid back and perhaps be able to get more information into the brain? Or should it be in between?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, Chris, because the approach with in South Africa has always been that you've got to pile on the pressure, and you know that the staff course has got to be, you've got to be under tremendous pressure all the time. In Spain, perhaps because it extends over 2 years, I found that it varied. There were times when there was tremendous pressure, and when you'd work right through the night. But it wasn't like that all the time. There were other times when it was quite relaxed, and when they went out to do practical exercises in the areas, different parts of Spain, that was usually quite relaxed. You know, we had the evenings free, and we were able to wander around and enjoy the areas. And while you were traveling around and doing your reconnaissance of the area, you had a chance to look at the places and to see things, and you know, little places like a place we went to called Rondo. Very, very unique geographic location, and so you had a chance to look at those sort of things. And so it in Spain, it did seem to be more of a sort of a combination of the two. I think there are times when you do need to put pressure on, because the student has got to understand that in a wartime situation there will be pressure. But I think there are other times when you need to relax a bit so the student can, you know, it's back to the situation that we had with the military academy, where when the decision was made to reduce the period in which the BMIL degree could be gained from 3 years to 2 years, it placed a lot of pressure on those students, but it also didn't give them the opportunity to absorb and to process the information that they'd learned during 1 year before they started on the next year. And the same thing applies with the staff course. It seems that the same people who thought that the 2-year system would be a good one are the same people who feel that you know, a staff course should be pressure all the way. People mustn't get a chance they mustn't get a break at all. They must just be forced to be under pressure. I know from the course I did at Luatla, the Battlegroup Course, over there were times when we were under very heavy pressure, when we were planning to actually employ the forces that were made available to us, and that was necessary. I think you had to try and simulate the wartime conditions as far as it's possible in a peacetime situation. But I tend to have my doubts as to what the value is of trying to maintain it for the whole course. There doesn't seem to be much point in that. And the trouble is that, you know, different students process something like that in different ways. For some people, they laugh it off. They don't allow it to get them down. They don't take it too seriously. For others, it just about breaks it. Of course, the argument is if somebody's going to break under that sort of pressure, he's going to break under pressure in combat. So it's good that you subject him to that. You see, it's also the approach that was taken with the Chilean Commando course. So I can't say that it's you should just have a relaxed situation to try and absorb everything, because then I think maybe you don't absorb everything the way you should, and you don't understand what the situation is going to be in real life. But whether there's any value in doing it all the time, I have my doubts about that.
I hear you, sir. Now I'm wondering, I've heard somewhere that some of these staff courses will distinguish the student into a blue or a red category. And one would be like a commander in the field, and the other one would be more logistics type of person. Were there any such type of things at this course?
No, the Spaniards didn't have that. We had it in South Africa at one stage, but it was done away with because it was not successful. It didn't make a lot of sense. We found that some guys who passed the red course, which was a whole year, now are theoretically they're going to be the commanders. Some of them were never appointed as commanders. Some of the guys who passed the blue course, who theoretically that's not the commandant staff, that's only management and staff. So they're only going to be staff officers. Some of them were appointed as commanders. So it tended to be ludicrous in the end. So they did away with it, and I think it was a good idea to do away with it. The Spaniards didn't have that at all. The Spaniards had one course. You had to maintain a certain standard, and there were some guys who didn't maintain the standard, usually during the first year, and then they would have to they would be withdrawn from the course, and you would know you were withdrawn when in the mornings when you arrive before the instructors come in. The class captain would stand in front and he'd make any announcements that need to be made, and he'd say the following, and he'd read out one or two names, and he'd say, tomorrow, camisa blanca, white shirt. Now, with the Spaniards, you wore a khaki shirt with your uniform normally, your tunic. But if it was a ceremonial and very formal occasion, then you wore a white shirt underneath with your tunic, a white shirt and a tie. So if he said to you, tomorrow, white shirt for these guys, that means that tomorrow you've got to go and see the colonel in charge of the tactics and logistics section. And he will take you through to the general in charge of the college. And you will be informed that you're not up to scratch. Take your things and go. So if somebody said, camisa blanca, if you were told camisa blanca, then you know you're off the course. And I remember this chief, our student leader, the one day he stood up there and he said, the following, tomorrow morning, white shirt. And he read out two names and he said, Iyo and me. So then we had to get a new chief of or a new student leader, because after that he was gone. He'd been withdrawn from the course. So they did have that you could be withdrawn from the course if you didn't maintain the high enough standard. But they were very careful about who they selected to go on the course. And the other thing about them was that the only people who attended their staff course were infantry, armor, as they called it, cavalry, artillery, engineers, which included both field engineers and signals. And that's it. Those are only the people who attended the staff course were selected from those corps. The people in the logistics field, in the personnel field, and so on, they didn't go on staff course, and they would only progress as far as colonel. But the generals all had to be from those four combat corps, combat support corps, and they were selected from those corps. The other thing about the Spaniards was that when those that came on course with me were the same people who had been at their military academy at the beginning of their career. So they started off and they went to the military academy, then they went into their corps and they spent 20 years doing other tasks, regimental tasks, and at the end of that they were only captains. And then they came on staff course. The same group of people came together. Of course, it was far fewer of them because it was a selected group. And it was a small course. It was only, as I say, about 34 Spaniards that started off, and I think there were 27 that finished. And then there were the 11 foreigners as well. So they had a different approach, but they never had the red and the blue course the way we did, and we only had it for a few years. When I got back from Spain, that system was in place, but shortly after that it was done away with, and it's a good thing too. You don't want to have a second class qualification. It's just not on, I don't think.
Yeah, well, I mean, you might be there as a second in command, and your commander dies, and now you have to take over, but you cannot because you are qualified blue instead of red. It doesn't make sense. You're quite right. It doesn't make sense.
It was a ridiculous system, and I don't know who brought in that system, but fortunately, it was seen as being a bad decision.
Now I want to take you back to the beginning of the program, sir. My last question. How good are these shots at Bisley? Because I've heard they were fantastic. Some of the best shots in the world you'll find at the Bisley ranges. Would that be true?
Yeah, I would say so, Chris. One of the reasons why I've continued to act as the chief range officer at the Bisley is because of my admiration, my absolute admiration for the skill that these people have developed with the shooting. As a soldier, I've done a lot of shooting. And as a young man, my father taught me to shoot when we lived on the farm. I've never been a particularly good shot, but I've always had a great admiration for people who are good shotists. And these guys who participate in the Bisley, you know, there are different classes in the Bisley. You get the target rifle class, and then you get the free rifle, and then under free rifle you've got several other classes as well. The free rifle tends to use a dead rest and a scope. The target rifle uses a peep sight. So you've just got a tiny little hole that you look through, and the front sight. There's no telescope. You've got a telescope on a separate tripod, but that's so that you can have a look to see where your shot has landed on the target, because you can't see through that little hole. Because you've got to remember that if in Bisley shooting, short range is 300 meters. Now in service rifle shooting, 300 meters is already becoming long range. But when you talk about long range in Bisley shooting, or the proper name is probably full bore shooting. Now the long range in Bisley shooting is 1,000 meters or 1,000 yards. You know, 1,000 yards, about 900 meters. So generally, we fire the longest range we fire, or the shortest fire during Bisley shooting is 900 meters. If we go to the UK and probably also in the USA, the ranges will go to 1,000 yards, and they'll fire from 1,000 yards, which is pretty much the same as a 900 meters. But at 900 meters, we're talking about a kilometer now. This is virtually a kilometer. When you look through those sights at the target, it's a big target, but at 900 meters, it's a very tiny little target. And over a distance of 900 meters, you've got things like wind, which causes some deflection. You have to take into account the trajectory. So when you're firing at that distance, you're actually shooting. You're not firing at the target. You're not aiming at the target when you shoot. So you have to adjust your sight significantly when you're firing at that range. You've got things like mirage, because at that distance, particularly in the hot weather that we have here in South Africa, the target is behind a mirage, and it's moving like this all the time. It's very difficult to. You have to acquire or learn the skill the skills that are necessary to be able to overcome these aspects, these limitations. And because the distance is so great, the wind can vary. So where you are, the flags that are up are blowing in this direction. Where the target is 900 meters away, they could be blowing in that direction. And halfway up between you and the target, they might be pointing down the range or up the range. You know, you get what they sometimes refer to as a fishtail, where the flags are doing this at the different ranges, because every 100 meters you've got a flag, so that the shotters can see what the wind conditions are that they have to work on and they have to compensate for. So it's extremely demanding. And there was a time when the military played a big role in the Bisley shooting, and in fact it originated as a military sport. These days you don't get very many military people participating. Most of the people who participate are private people, civilians. But I have to also say that it's become an extremely expensive sport, as is the case with most sports. To buy a rifle, a good rifle, with the right action, the right barrel, the type of stock that you want, that costs you a lot of money. To get a good telescope, for a spotting telescope so that you can see where the targets land, a good telescope is going to cost you a lot of money. You have to have a shooting jacket that you put on, that you can wrap the sling around, because when you're firing a target rifle, you don't have a dead rest. You just have a sling which you've got to hook onto your special shooting jacket, and then you've got to fire like that. And all the shooting is done in the prone position, lying down. If you're going to shoot F-class, it becomes even more expensive, because now you've got to get a telescope for your rifle that's fitted onto your rifle. You've got to get a bipod to rest the rifle on. All of these things are, and they're very complex, sophisticated bipods, because when you put the rifle on, depending on which class you're in, some of them you can actually clamp the rifle in there, and then you've got to have an adjustable bipod that you can move it into the best position for shooting. It becomes very complex, and it's very sophisticated, and it's extremely expensive. I mean, every round that you fire probably costs you close to 10 Rand. So, and if you're going to shoot in a competition, because the rounds are now hand loaded, and you're going to shoot in a competition, you're probably going to fire 10 rounds in that competition, and then you've got to pay to enter the competition, and you've got to pay all sorts of other fees. It's become an exorbitantly expensive sport. So a lot of military people just don't get a good enough salary to be able to continue shooting in that sport. So,
but it's a very passionate sport, sir. I mean, I can hear it in your voice, so I'm thinking we should actually bring a few Bisley shooters and yourself once we're done with this series in another 5-6 episodes, and then we can, introduce this to the world. Because I recall seeing the pictures of the Bisley shooters long ago. I mean, probably more than 100 years ago, but they would have like the standard 303 from a British Army.
yeah.
But they would shoot with this thing, so they would shoot many times as far as what you would normally shoot. So this is tradition. This is not just from now. I mean, this comes a long way.
Yeah, the truth is, Chris, that the military snipers could probably learn quite a lot from the people who engage in long range shooting. It's a sport that requires tremendous skill and tremendous concentration. So for me with the target, they have rings on the target to indicate whether if you score a bull, then you get 5 points. If you're in the next ring, you only get 4 points. And if you're outside of the outer ring, 3 points or 1 point, whatever the case might be. So it's you want to try and land your shots inside the center circle. But it's reached such a high level of accuracy now that inside that center circle, they've got another little circle, which is called the V-bull. It doesn't give you any points. But if a guy shoots a bull and the other guy shoots a V-bull, then the guy with the V-bull is regarded as the winner. And the amazing thing is that when you get out onto the 900-meter mark and you're standing there and you're watching these guys shooting, and the guy with a target rifle, so he's not using a telescope to shoot, and he shoots a V-bull, and you think that's amazing. You can't even see that V-bull from where he is. And then his next shot comes, and it's another V-bull. And his third shot comes, and it's another V-bull. You just shake your head. You cannot believe the accuracy of these guys. And you see it's got a lot to do with temperament. You have to have a certain temperament to be able to shoot like that. And you can't have people who lose their temper and get angry and start blaming other people and so on. The person's got to have the temperament to be able to manage the setbacks and to recover and to learn from the mistakes and to move forward. It requires a very special sort of person. So I've come to deeply value the Bisley shotists, and many of them have become good friends of mine. And I look forward every year to running the range for them and for being exposed to the incredible skill that they have.
Well, Internet, we've come to the end again of another fascinating episode. General, please, thank you. As always, thank you, and thank your wife as well that she's allowing you here to speak to us so many hours. It's just fascinating to us. Thank you for that. And to the rest of you, I just want to tell you once again, you know what I'm going to say to you. Come and talk to us. Come and tell us your story. Don't be ashamed. Don't let anybody tell you were worthless or you were just this or just that. Forget about that. You went, you served. We want to know your story. And until we meet again, God bless.